Welcome to day one of the AIGA Design and Business Conference. Thank you so much for joining us. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Lishan Huang, Design Education Manager here at AIGA. I'll turn it over to the co-chairs of the AIGA DEC, Mina Khalili and Megan D.
Thank you so much, Lishan, for that. Hello, everybody. We're so glad that you could make it here today. I'm Mina Khalili. I'm a designer, illustrator, and an assistant professor of design at the University of South Carolina School of Visual Art and Design. I teach interaction, typography, and systems and design foundations as well. And as you know, I also serve nationally as the co-chair of the AIGA Design Educators Community Steering Committee. And with me is Megan D.
So, as said, I'm the co-chair of the Design Educators Community, and I'm also a working graphic designer, and I'm an associate professor and the chair of graphic design at Virginia Tech. And as of next week, I'll be on a year-long sabbatical if anyone has fun projects they want me to be a part of. I'd also just do one more little plug. The Design Educators Community will be hosting a standalone conference the first week in August, so if anyone's interested in not just student-centric activities, but design education activities. Keep an eye out for that, and we'll post links to our website where you can sign up for a newsletter and all sorts of fun stuff. But we couldn't be more excited about our panelists today and all of our presenters. So we're going to introduce our first two speakers. So Mitch Goldstein will be talking about how to be you. He is a designer, artist, and educator based in upstate New York, where he is an associate professor at Rochester Institute of Technology, teaching in the College of Art and Design. He has a fine art practice focusing on a variety of digital and analog materials, and both writes and speaks about art and design education, pedagogy, and creative practice. He received his MFA in Design and Visual Communications from Virginia Commonwealth University, Go Rams, and his BFA in graphic design from the Rhode Island School of Design. He is currently pursuing another master's degree in furniture design from RIT. And then Mina's going to introduce Nick, but Mitch will be up first.
That's right. So Nick Longo is a lover of all things branding. Born and raised on the other side of the US in Southern California, he leads Longo Designs, a food and beverage-based branding studio focusing on strategic storytelling design. In addition to being a design instructor at his alma mater, California State University, Northridge, Nick also hosts the Deeply Graphic Design Cast. Plus, he produces and hosts the Office Hours show on Adobe Live. Previously, Nick co-managed Equity Marketing, a leading promotional products company in Los Angeles, overseeing custom retail product development for clients such as Kellogg's, Kohl's, Burger King, Macy's, Kraft Foods, DreamWorks, and Starbucks. He's partnered with over 150 internationally known entertainment brand licenses and has successfully developed 1,000 plus product launches in various industries. Everybody, please welcome Mitch Goldstein and Nick Longo.
Okay, everybody, thank you. So, as I was so lovely introduced, my name is Mitch Goldstein, and like Megan, I am also on sabbatical this fall, which is pretty amazing, and I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'll figure it out. So what I want to talk to you all about today is a really, really simple idea when it comes to sort of the job hunt and getting a job and getting employed, and that's really just how to be you. And why being who you are, being yourself, is just so incredibly important when it comes time for the job search. And Nick and I chatted, and we're going to both make our presentations pretty quick so we can do lots of Q&A at the end. So this should be just 10 minutes from me. So the first thing to really understand, and you've really got to remember this, and it seems obvious, but people forget, which is that people hire people, not portfolios. So when you are presenting yourself to a possible job at an interview on a Zoom, whatever, you got to remember that you are not just a set of skills. You're not just a degree. You're not just like your carefully curated 15 images of your best work. You're not just your, clever introductory email or LinkedIn message. You are an actual human person. And so you've got to remember that when you're being interviewed and considered for a job, that something the people who are interviewing you are asking themselves as they're doing it is basically, do they want to sit next to you every day? Are they going to want to spend 40, probably 50, 60, whatever hours a week with you? So in your resume, In your portfolio, during your interviews, you are absolutely conveying your skills, you're absolutely conveying your abilities. You're talking about what you bring to the table as a professional designer. You're letting them learn who you are as a designer, as an employee, and as somebody who brings value to the job. But you are also letting them know who you are as a person that they're going to toss ideas around with, as a person they're going to collaborate with and spend time with every week, as a person who's going to sit 5 feet away from them every day. And so a lot of the interview process on the point of the employer is basically them trying to figure out, can this candidate do the job? But it is also them trying to figure out, do we want this candidate to do the job here with us together in a room every day? And so you've really got to remember that you are first a human being and a designer second. And really, before you're a designer, you might be a parent or a sibling or a friend or a spouse or a caregiver or 8 million other things that are way more important than being a designer. So really, you're a human first and you're a designer maybe like 23rd. And I think it's really good to understand and acknowledge that because you are being hired, not your portfolio. But the catch to this is there's a flip side. And that side is that nobody wants to work with an asshole. Absolutely nobody wants to do this. Now, they will if they have to, and I think we all know quite a few assholes get jobs, but nobody wants to work with an asshole, regardless of how amazing their work is. Nobody wants to spend 40, 60, whatever hours a week sitting next to somebody who's a jerk, who they don't like, who they don't respect, who is self-absorbed, who is arrogant, who is difficult to deal with, and not someone they just want to be around at all. So you have to be a good person, not just a good designer. And part of that in the context of jobs and just sort of in life, just in general, is about working well with others. It's about listening to people, taking criticism, considering ideas that you didn't come up with, listening to different opinions that you don't necessarily agree with, and accepting that you're not always right. So you got to make sure that your work is good, but you also got to make sure that you are good too. And so regarding your portfolio specifically, I think this is really, really important, which is that you should always show the kind of work you want to do more of. Show the kind of work that you want someone to pay you to do. If you have work you don't care about, if you have work you don't want to have a job making, don't show it. And there's going to be a difference between what your teachers tell you, what your friends tell you, what other designers tell you, especially other designers on social media tell you. What they say is important and interesting, and what you think is actually important and interesting. If you don't like making apps, don't put a bunch of apps in your portfolio. If you don't want to work in print, don't put a bunch of printed stuff in your portfolio. Your portfolio is a story about you and what you care about, and I think you should make that story honest and authentic. And show work you care about, show work you're excited about, show work you want to do more of, even if the other work looks kind of slicker and cooler and more polished. Now, I've looked at, I mean, I can't even guess a number, but Nick and I together have probably looked at thousands of portfolios. And it is glaringly obvious what stuff a person cares about and what stuff somebody threw into their portfolio because somebody else said they should. And so this is why I think it's really good to show stuff that is not necessarily design in your portfolio. It's good to show stuff that is not necessarily directly relevant to the job in your portfolio. Because your paintings or your sculptures or ceramics or drawings or like anything, they help flesh out a story about who you are. So I can tell you that I would much, much, much rather see an unrefined, really interesting, esoteric project that you clearly care about instead of just some super clean, super slick project that you don't care about at all. And so with that in mind, I know that you all have been told repeatedly that craft is important. I am constantly, endlessly talking about this as an educator, paying attention to the details. And in graphic design, this is stuff like your kerning, right? Things lining up correctly, making sure your colors are dialed in and matched to other colors, making sure your grids are fully sort of sorted out. But when it comes to applying for jobs and you start making your resume and your website and your portfolio, you also have to remember that spelling and grammar and how you are communicating also count because spelling and grammar don't matter except when they does, right? So we all know that if you're bad at spelling, it doesn't mean you're a bad designer at all. Or if you have a really tough time with sort of writing, it doesn't mean you're going to have a tough time working with type and image. But bad spelling on something really important like your resume or like your website or like the email you send out to a potential job, or let's say a presentation you're giving to a national audience on Zoom for AIGA, that is an indication of your attention to detail and your care in making things. And so spelling and grammar are the kind of things that you're really only going to notice if they're incorrect and will generally be basically ignored if you do it correctly. And so the reason why this matters is that mistakes like spelling and grammar, they're a distraction from people who are looking to get to know you and your work. It gets in the way of them seeing you first, and instead they see this stupid, careless spelling error. And so in this context, good craft is not as much about good craft as it is about not bad craft. It's about not giving someone a reason to second guess you. It's about eliminating something which is easily and completely fixable. It's completely within your control, that only hurts you, and it only takes away from employers learning more about you. So the reality is, will you not get a job because you misspelled a word? Highly unlikely. And if somebody doesn't hire you because of that, you probably don't want to work there anyway. But it is a bump in the road. And if there are enough bumps in the road, you get distracted from the destination. So don't give a potential job a really stupid reason to just second guess hiring you for even an instant based on something really dumb and really preventable like a spelling error or grammar. Now, when it comes to jobs, projects, freelance gigs, really anything else, I think it is incredibly important to trust your gut. You should always listen to yourself and take what you feel about something very seriously. If it doesn't feel right, don't take the job or the project or the whatever. And you got to be 100% honest with yourself about how you feel about something. So even if something looks amazing on paper, like a cool job at a cool studio in a cool city with cool offices and cool stacks and cool looking people and everything's cool, but it doesn't feel good to you, I think you should walk away from it. Now, this is not about only finding that one perfect job and never taking anything else. That is not what I'm suggesting. What I'm saying is you need to listen to yourself, you need to be honest with yourself, and when you start to kind of raise flags in your head about an opportunity, pay attention to that. Doesn't mean you shouldn't necessarily take it, but be aware of that. And I got to tell you, this is excruciating to put into practice, but I assure you, having made mistakes in my life, it is very important. And it really does not matter at all what anybody else tells you is a good job, because nobody knows what's good for you more than you. Now, like I said, sometimes you might have to take a job that maybe doesn't feel good. Maybe you've got some red flags, but you want to, do stuff like pay your rent or eat or pay back your student loans. And I think that is just fine. But I think you should acknowledge your concerns. You should make sure you are not getting taken advantage of, and you should look for new opportunities as soon as possible. It is totally okay for you to quit a job 2 months into taking it. It's not the best thing in the world, but if it's better for you to do that, I think that is totally fine. And so to finish all this up, really just comes down to one really, really simple idea, which is just be who you are. Be who you actually are, not some kind of fake made up version of yourself that your teachers said you're supposed to be, or that you think the jobs want you to be, or that people like me who babble on social media tell you a designer is supposed to be. Just be you, because that is who is getting hired, you. And you're the one showing up to the office every day. So the more authentic you are, the more real you are, the better you will match for the right job. The one that fits the actual real you, not the fake, contrived, artificial, made up you. Just be who you are. Thank you very much.
I think that segues us into Nick.
You got it. Let's get that going. Thanks, guys. And Mitch, I could have used that advice a couple of days ago. I didn't trust my gut on something, and totally same thing. It never ends. Like these lessons, I think the best thing for any of us as panelists, advisors, professors, professionals with any more years than you guys, is to show that vulnerability and to show that, you know, these things never set in stone. You still make mistakes along the way, and we're always learning. And I corrected a typo 5 minutes ago in my presentation. Thanks, Mitch. So, what I want to kind of go over is some stuff, and I've been doing a lot of this research over the last few months for my students, for our podcast, and for some other applications as well. And that is kind of this whole idea of resumes and applying for jobs. And what I found to be the most kind of interesting way to go about this was to show some of the mistakes, because advice and things to say must haves of a resume are so convoluted right now. And there's no, if there was a surefire way to make a resume, that would be the template we'd all buy and it would work. But it is so crazy how much different advice and stuff are out there. So I always want to like mention that there is a bit of a disclaimer. So these are the best tips that I've been able to find of things not to do, and some great tips of kind of things what we should be doing that I think a lot of people can agree on. But this does require some personal research for you, who you are, everything you just heard from like what Mitch said about who you are and being you. Let that really drive this for you personally, and don't just take a template and make it your own by substituting all of your copy and things like that in there. There's conflicting advice everywhere. I couldn't believe how much I saw where it said, make it a Word doc, make it an interactive PDF, do a video, make it just type only. There's all kinds of responses out there as far as what it should be. But for this in particular, what I want to kind of say is that we're going to go more entry level with this. We are going to go thinking of you guys, and that it's your first few times going out there and looking for a job. So let's try to help you and determine what to do and what not to do. So the first point here, if you've ever said this, think twice. All I need is one resume. Have you been that person that you spent all that time crafting this perfect one, and you've had 15 people look over and there's not a typo in the entire sheet, and you think you're done, and you give yourself even a little pat on the back? You've just begun. That's kind of the truth. And I want you to think that this one size fits all resume no longer exists. I remember the first few times going through the last time I ever had to have one, and I must have done a save as and made about 400 different versions of it, because you want to customize it. You want to do something specific for each opportunity that you're going for. So here's some tips on what you should be thinking about when you've created that one and it is all done. Like I said, customize it for any opportunity that is coming your way. And look at that job posting. Look at the one you are applying for. I even would title that resume, do a save as, and put the name of the company I'm going for with that one, because all the clues to how you can be better found and matched with that are in that job posting by finding keywords and things that you saw in there. Mitch mentioned about doing the work you want to do, right? So let's hope your portfolio has all this stuff in there. So if it's heavily packaging and branding, you're not applying for the UX UI job, right? Because you don't have that skill and it's not shown in there. Your keywords from the posting will now match better, because if it's all about branding, packaging, or whatever you're specializing in, drop those into your resume and make sure that is there. There are so many ways that that is scanned, and they want to make sure that you are a match, and human eyes aren't doing it. It's done by these bots, and we'll talk about that a little bit in another slide. One thing you should be thinking about is make a word only doc of this. That's text only. Strip all graphics out of this thing. If you are applying on some way where it is asking you to upload it and it looks like a service that the company is using, you might want to try that one first, okay? That's one way you can make sure that your resume is found on content alone, not on flashy graphics or that amazing logo that you just created for yourself. Make a Word doc one, see how that goes. And then as you are doing this and going through the process, continue to do more save as and organize all of your resumes. What I usually have is like, I have one that is particularly for branding emphasis. Then I have a second one that's all about packaging. Then I have one that's all about creative direction and leadership. So you make these more customized to whatever you are doing. Next up, I'm going to fill my resume with a ton of graphics that will completely unfocus your resume. This just made me laugh when I saw this, because look, we all want to show our chops. I get it. We are designers. We should not have a resume that looks like a lawyer. Yes, that is correct. But we should not have a resume that no one will, one, want to print, two, will never make it through any of those scanners, and three, it's just an eyesore, okay? don't do this. There are so many reasons we don't want to fill that up. We want to show confidence in other ways. So, number one, this is a communication document first. Think of this as that beautiful layout you're doing for a project. Think of it as the editorial piece you're putting together where content is king, not the frosting, not the accents. Okay. Refrain from that graphic overload. That's number one, right? But you can find unique ways by your font choices, a signature color. That's about as far as I think some people want to take it. Now, again, there's so many different advice on this. I've seen people use pictures, I've seen people not. You might have an idea that maybe the picture doesn't work. I've seen successful ones. I mean, there's an exception to every rule. But when you do this and you have all those graphics on there, you're not being considerate of those AI scanners that are going to be looking and scanning that resume first. All they're going to get with this guy is probably a black page. It's not even going to register. Okay. So again, make sure you're keeping it clean, super communicative. And you want to remember this as well. Non-creatives might be looking at this before the creative does. So HR, recruitment, maybe even the Indeed or LinkedIn kind of filters as well. So the second or third person might be that creative director. Smaller firms, obviously, it might go to that person first. But think of it that way. If someone in HR gets that resume, it might just be trashed right immediately. Okay, so keep that in mind. Always have these versions ready to go. There are ways to include your personality and some design in there, but do it with the design principles, not with extra AI and vectors. Okay. Next point. I hear this from every student who only has maybe one or two jobs. Well, I really didn't do that much at that last job. So I'm going to make this a really brief resume and do bullet points that just say, I created logos for this company. Not exactly the best way to put your foot forward. So how do you get over this one? You need to quantify everything you've done at a previous job. And I don't even care if it's Subway that you worked at for 8 years. If you did something for 8 years, 4 years, 3 years, that tells me you've stuck with something for a while, and it says a lot to me. Most people I've hired, it doesn't discard me when I see something that says that's not qualified in there. If it's in there for a reason, because of the time spent or the commitment made to that company, that tells me everything. Okay, just like Mitch says, that's a person that I'll probably want to work 40 hours of work week because they've done that already. Okay, so what I mean by quantify is this: think about the value you brought to any individual job. And this could even be something you talked to a professor with. Maybe it was a supervisor at one of the jobs you worked at. What value did you bring? How did you move the needle at that company? So when you're saying, I did social media work for my on campus club, that's not enough. That's a given. We know you should be doing that as a graphic designer in your last year of school. But what you want to say is, did it increase their viewership? Did it increase their members? Did it increase engagement? And were people talking more than ever because of the social media post you designed? So think of it as feature first and then benefit second. Okay. What benefit did you bring to that employer? And put that in that bullet point more than bragging rights as far as I did 16 brochures. That doesn't matter. Tell them what it did for the company. If you are questioning that and you're this girl going, I didn't do much, ask somebody, ask a coworker, ask someone who might know from their vantage point. Oh, you know what? You did do a great job with that. And guess what? We went up 400 viewers. We got more engagement on those social media points, all because you did something really great that engaged the consumer. Remember, we're all about persuasion with this stuff. So however you can change and move that needle, that's what you want to brag about, not just so much the logo or the social media post that you designed. Okay, golden rule. This is the best one, guys. You've got to get rid of this. Who cares if you are 24% proficient in Adobe Acrobat? That is the craziest thing in the world. When we see these bars and graphs on resumes, I believe when myself, Mitch, and a few of us did some portfolio reviews last year, and Diane, I think, was part of that as well, Mina, we all laughed and just said, can we just make a golden rule? Take the charts of proficiency in your software out. Okay, the simple fact is this means absolutely nothing. Okay, I was thinking of this the other day. I've been working in Illustrator for 20 plus years. I'm still at about 65%. Okay, no one is going to be at that 100. So when you're coming out of school, all you have to say is, I'm proficient in everything you need. I got it down. I'm good. right? You could just show software suites by saying Adobe Creative Suite. You could just say Google Office Suites, Microsoft Office, whatever that thing is that you know is your North Star, that thing that you can point to and say, I'm there. It leads all my process, all my communication, all my design. Great. Because some of us look at it and it looks like extra fluff. It looks like maybe you didn't have enough stuff to put on that resume and you had this big blank space and you just put it in there. So again, list out the simple things that you know, that is fine. Try replacing it. I saw one student do something really cool where instead of the chart where it's like, well, 100% is your goal and you're at 62%, whatever that meant, right? Who quantifies that? Best thing to do is think of a pie chart, and that could be your soft skills. Now, ask a particular person maybe you worked with. Were you great at communication? Were you great at organization? Could you problem solve better than most designers? Were you adaptable to go from one job to the next? Maybe that could be something that you can replace it with and say, like, as a worker, what you can expect from me is this. And those are your qualified soft skills. So that could be a unique way to do it, because I understand you might have a little room on that thing and you might not have a lot of content. So keep that in mind. That might be the best way to do it. So some final ideas. These are just some great tips that I want to make sure you guys kind of think about. Don't forget to check the grammatical errors 100%. Always have other eyes look at this. I know I will completely admit I am the worst speller. I am an impatient person. I send things off before double checking. What I like to do now is through Slack and some other channels that I have some other designer friends or even just other professionals that have not seen these documents. I'll send them that and they will see those things. They will stick out like a sore thumb. I do not see those. I can scan 1,000 times. Our friend Victor is one of the best. He can just spot these things out. The minute a slide comes on, he's like, you need an extra space between learn and to. Like, and you're like, whoa, I missed that. We're all not programmed the same way. Also, number 2, pair this up with the perfect companion cover letter. That cover letter has to look, feel, and come from the same cohesive brand and look and feel that you've done with this resume. So you want to make sure these are hand-in-hand partners. And again, there is no one cover letter that runs it all. That must be the most personalized and changed thing. I like having a formula of 3 or 4 paragraphs, and you change keywords, you change it up to match exactly what that is asking for. And the last one, you've now wrote this thing. Most important thing is to learn how to pitch it. So read this thing, know it like the back of your hand. Don't just finish it and send it off. You want to know how to sell this just as good as it was that you wrote it. Okay. So all those little points that you say there, have some backup stuff, have a story to tell. That's the stuff that people love to hear. So when you're in that interview, you are now linking back to this resume and all those key things. They've already read it. And now they're seeing your book and you're telling them stories about your journey along the way. To a young designer, to someone who's right out of school, this is so important to have, because this is the stuff that will catapult you and they'll look at you like you might have 2 to 3 years actual experience outside of school, because you're talking the talk after you've walked the walk with this thing. So that's my presentation on that. I hope you guys enjoyed it. We can't wait to talk and have some Q&A with you guys. Hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Mitch. So we'll encourage everyone here to pop your questions in the chat or in the Q&A feature as well. And I'll open the floor up to see if there are any questions from the folks here now. One of the things that I want to input there, Nick, that you mentioned, and I want to share this advice because I thought this was such good advice from one of my colleagues, Marius Valdez, who said, when you're trying to position your, when you're trying to position all the things that you can offer a company, and maybe I said this to you before, Nick, but I'm saying it out loud here. Think about all the things they'd lose if they lost you, and then write it from that angle. So you're a hard worker, you're loyal, all these things, right? But also, you know, your other capabilities, because so much of this does feed into our ability to know what our value is. And when we think about removing ourselves from a situation, what is the deficit in answering that question?
I like that. I think maybe even younger designers might have a better chance of writing those key things and benefits that you brought in when you think about it that way. You know what I mean? So if I'm gone, what do they lose? Love that.
Well, and I see we have a question here in the chat. Since it's about potentially switching careers, I won't say their name. But any advice for someone trying to do a career change? They've got a lot of experience, but not immediately design related.
Ooh, and trying to get into the design industry, I'm assuming.
Uh, they're welcome to clarify. Yes.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think, obviously, again, you have to have the goods to back up wherever you're changing or entering to. And you do come with a lot of great things that you've probably already got from whatever industry you're in. So build off that. Try to consider yourself that you already have a head start in soft skills, in work environment, in compromising, in meetings, and all the things that you have. Now build on it and do the design part. But again, that is starting from something completely new and fresh. What do you think, Mitch?
Yeah, I would totally agree. And I think as someone who decided to go back to school in my 30s after successfully failing out in my 18s and 19s, I think that you not being younger is actually an enormous benefit because you
Mhm.
bring the actual world into the job. And that's not to in any way dismiss students who are just coming out of college, but what you have that other people don't have is experience, right? You have life experience. And I think that is insanely valuable, incredibly valuable, and it should not be diminished. It
Mhm.
shouldn't be, apologizing for your previous career. It should be, here's why I'm amazing, in part because I have this other set of experience that the average, whatever, 22-year-old is not going to bring to the table.
Yeah.
So I think you've got to lean it hard into that, lean really hard.
Well, and I had a follow-up question there. So Nick said you do have to bring the goods. So if someone's not from a design background, what are some options for getting the goods?
Ooh, it depends on your timeline. If you need this in a year and a half, you you better dedicate the next year and a half to learning as much as you can from as many people as you can. The wonderful thing, and even as a teacher, I will heavily recommend there are free, great ways to learn all over the internet, all over. And once we get back into real life things and we can go to these conferences and do those things, that's the juice that kind of helps you grow and do it. But there is a lot of work ahead of you. But find it. It's all over the place. YouTube, Skillshare, you name it. I mean, I'm sure all of us can name 5 or 6 ways to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what people don't realize is that most public libraries have a subscription to LinkedIn Learning for free. So, in addition to public libraries being the most amazing things on the planet, you also get this subscription to thousands and thousands of hours of instruction. And the honest reality is, software is easy. Software is not what this is about. So, you can pick that stuff up no problem. Something that I've suggested to people that has seemed to work out pretty well is if you find nonprofits, sort of normally I would say locally, but honestly, really anywhere these days. And you can offer to design for them for free with the understanding that you sort of do creative control. It isn't a freebie. It's something that you would charge for, but you're going to come to them like, I'm learning, I'm new, I'm emerging. So I want to do this thing for you for free, but I'm going to kind of call the shots a little bit. And yes, you do kind of do some back and forth, but just as a way to get an air quote client, it's a really good way to do that because they are generally not going to have money and they will take a lot more sort of risks than people who have, an enormous budget and can really kind of like be super selective. So I think that's a great way to get some work under your belt. It's real work. You're really working with other people. You're actually talking to clients. You're doing stuff that will be out in the world. It's a great,
Yeah.
great, great way to kind of just get cranky.
So we have a few questions, and I know Diane has one, but I want to go to one in the chat that sort of feeds off of Nick's mentioning about scanners and bots and
Mhm.
those things. So Alexis asks if you could talk a little bit about how you might make your resume visible to those scanners if you're transitioning from a non-design role and don't have that title in your work experience. So maybe some verbiage shifting.
Yeah, I guess that would be fantastic. I mean, it's all keywords too, right? So first off, just make sure readability, structured nicely, not a lot of not no 3 column thing. Just try to get the thing as clean and simple as possible, right? Then the content is what's really king, and that's the stuff, particularly whatever that job is you're going for. find those areas where you're mentioning things of expertise or whatever, and that's where you can change the keyword to match specifically whatever that new opportunity is. And if it's a new direction, I guess was that part of the question, like moving into a new field?
Yeah, where they don't necessarily have that title in one of their roles.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, that's a good one. I think too you can kind of shift the, let's say, the lead kind of position, or the description of that person, that actual thing they want, has some keywords in there too. Maybe bring that in there. Don't you're not going to lie and change your title name, but what you can do is really finesse that description of that job opportunity, that job description you had, and put in keywords that have some synergy to whatever you found in the job posting.
Yeah, and don't put ninja, guru, Yoda, all that garbage. Don't do that. Don't
Just
do that,
drop them.
folks. Just don't play that stupid game.
Unicorn.
Yeah, you're not a unicorn. Please don't.
Another good question in the chat. These you guys are really writing some good ones. Is one that I struggle with too, and I think the group of educators here might also feel this way. Sam asks if you see a benefit in creating a physical version of your portfolio, such as a printed booklet to show potential
Mm.
employers.
It's a good question.
Ooh.
I'll jump on that first. I'm curious what Nick has to say, but I think that if you're going to be working in things that are going to be printed in books, absolutely. Like I think if you're going to a studio that will be doing printed collateral, hell's yes. I think if you're going to work someplace that is purely digital and only does apps and only does UX UI, I think it's cool. Like as a sort of analog person, I think it's going to be super cool to see it, but I'm not so sure it's as relevant. Um, I think spend your time refining other stuff first, and then maybe consider doing that. But I do think, and I'm curious what y'all think, is about like a leave behind, some kind of physical artifact you can literally leave behind at an interview. And again, who knows if that's going to be on Zoom or in person in the next couple of years. But that could be actually really good. You know, a really well-designed little thing saying, hey, really appreciate your time, would love to talk about the future, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah. I think the leave behind is a great one to have something tactical, something physical. It's particularly if you've gotten the interview or something like that. I think that's a really neat way to do it. I've been experiencing, or just like experimenting in the video case studies of my work. And I love that idea. I'm doing it just to technically really learn how to edit. I want to get into doing more video work. So my thought was, let me take some of the case studies I have, and I'm finding it harder and harder to describe to potential clients, or even let's say an employer that's not on the creative side, what exactly I can bring to the table, what my advantage is to work with me. And the video is showing me a way to do something and that I can't explain in just a real put together case study or portfolio piece. So to me, it gives me a chance to emphasize certain things and do. So that might be a unique thing to do as well. On the leave behind thing, I'm going to post a link to a video here in the chat, and you guys feel free to watch this later on. One of the cool agencies out of Portland, Lincoln Design, had their first ever junior designer position posted. And he got a ton of resumes and stuff. But what he was surprised at was so many people just emailed him a zip file with just 400 JPEGs. And he was like, that's not how you apply for a job. So him and I did an Instagram live where we told people, you've got to put the passion into what you are sending. If you really want this job, and they're a well-loved place by a lot of young designers, then this video shows the response he got back and the things that people sent that were physical and live and in person, who really wanted the job. So it's a fantastic video to look through. He shows all of the best of what people sent. I'm not saying you have to do this, but get inspired by what others are doing. It's stand up or sit down, right? I want to stand up if I'm going after something. You don't want to be sitting down.
So logistically, Michaela has a great question that sort of feeds into this. They ask, I've done some motion design and added it to my portfolio as an interactive PDF, but the portfolio is always way too large to email. So do you recommend that method, or should they stick to, should they do another method of sending this motion design work or these videos out so that they can get it out to clients?
Yeah. Well, you could obviously put the reel together and have it live somewhere, YouTube, anywhere, even Dropbox, and send links. Then you're not cluttering their email with tons of attachments and megabytes of stuff, and you're not worried about quality too. I know with anything in motion or video, you want the best foot forward, right? Send them a link, have it live somewhere on the clouds, and you're good to go.
Yep. And I would add to that a direct link,
Mm.
not a link to 75 videos, but a link to the video you are talking about. It
Yes.
should be one mouse click to see your stuff.
Hmm. Good idea.
So Diane, what's your question?
So I guess this is kind of maybe it's to both of you, but I think maybe more Mitch. So talk about culture. So how would somebody know that it's a good culture fit? I find that my students have a hard time. They're like, "Oh, I just want to do this work for these people do that already, right?" And I'm like, "Well, maybe you should be unique in that company, or you can offer them something." But then, how do you know before you should? There's lots of ways. How would you tell people whether they're re-entering the workforce, or what kind of investigation could they do to know that that company or those companies would be a good fit?
I mean, that's a really good question. Now, I, I would defer to Nick for sort of the platforms answer, like Glassdoor and LinkedIn and all that stuff. I don't really use those, so I'm going to let Nick answer that. But I would say you have to remember that when you're interviewing them as well as them interviewing you. Now, you might not say that out loud, but that is absolutely true. You have to walk into these interviews like, I've got all the offers in the world. Why should I work for you? Now, you don't want to be a jerk about it. Don't be arrogant about it. But ultimately, that's the question you got to ask yourself, because if you're good, you're going to have multiple offers. And it really comes down again to that thing which we can't teach, which is your gut feeling.
Hmm.
You just have to learn to be truthful with yourself about what you really want. And the problem is, especially today, is there is zero friction between what you want and other people telling you what you're supposed to want. There is no friction there anymore. It is every person on Twitter, every person on social, it is everything, every Medium post you've ever read. And I think that's fine. And look, the reason why I'm on this panel is because I made a name for myself by doing this on Twitter, right? But put it aside. Like, it's fine. I think there's value there. Put it aside and be honest with what you want. Your most important thing might be taking care of your kid, or it might be spending time with your spouse, or it might be whatever, playing music or sports or something. It might not be flowing text and design. And so if you go into a job and they're like, we work hard, play hard, we're going to do 100-hour weeks, but we have kombucha, that might not necessarily be a job you really want to
Hmm.
do. And I think you've just got to you cannot bullshit yourself. You just have to be really honest with yourself about what you
Kind of like WeWork, right? Like, you've all seen the documentaries that, like, you can't have all that and still do great work. Like, just like Mitch said, right? It's like there's a balance. One thing I love is, God, I wish this last year has kind of put a damper on this, but I used to take my students to design studios all over Los Angeles, and one of the best things, not just because of the connection and the networking, but I wanted them to see the differences of the spectrum of design studios and the culture that they're going to expect, because I want them to see the one that's more appropriate for them. We went to everything from, we walked in and they're literally like, be very quiet, all the designers are designing, they have headphones on and the drapes are closed, and it was a morgue, and people are doing the whole, like, looking over and going right back to the work, no one's talking. And cut to the next week, I take them to this small little boutique place in Pasadena, and everyone's welcoming and going, let's have some coffee. They have a foosball table. It's not over the top, but it was just enough to have a strong culture. And we talked about it. And every single one of them was like, that's the place I want to gear more towards that. So a lot of times you have to see it. And the challenge right now is you're probably interviewing over Zoom and you're not even going to their office until everyone's back. So you got to even do more investigating. Ask to talk to other employees. Who's on my team? Can I talk to them? Can we set up a one-on-one? If they're hiding anything, woo, they won't say yes to that one.
Exactly.
But if they're proud of the culture they've designed and they've put together, they will be more than happy to give you a few links to that. Because that's something I would do. I'd be like, I need this person now. If they're already talking to you like that, they need you, and you've already been selected. So investigate as much as you can.
So a couple of resume questions.
Mhm.
Megan asked one, which
You're okay, Mina.
Yeah.
because it feeds into not Natalie's question, the anonymous attendee's question. So Megan mentioned the other day and just now that she's often seeing just a link to apply. Just send a link. And anonymous attendee asks, how long is the industry standard resume? I've often heard one page, unless you've worked for 10 plus years. Is this true in design? So a couple
Yeah.
of questions about resumes there.
I think it's true. I think no bigger than one page if you are entry level in your first maybe 1 to 4 years. I do know that like as you get more advanced and things like that, it might become a 3-pager, but just like we said earlier, no one size fits all. Make a 1-pager version of that as well. Once executive level folks, if you can look around and look for and just Google executive level resumes, and you'll see they're much more headline. It feels like it's just like this quick capture of your entire career on one page without a lot of detail. Then you can have your secondary one as well. That's something you should be doing even as a young designer. That 1-pager that even has some work on it or something cool. Think of it as a mini portfolio, mini resume together. Break the rules. Like, why not? Like, I mean, to the right person, you could tell if a company's going to be like impressed by that or go like, So try some different things. Yeah.
I have nothing to add. Nick is correct. And I think in the chat, Alberto had a good point about they're going to go to your site or somebody, they're going to go, they're not going to like look at your resume and stop researching you. They're going to look at your socials. They're going to look at your website. They're going to look at all the stuff you've put out into the world, especially if you're getting into that, for past that first sort of that first round of screening. So I agree. I think that fluffy language, clear kind of BS embellishing, it's just, you can't play that game. It just does not hold water.
So perhaps 2 more combined. So a question I always see from my students is, how long do you keep stuff from high school on your resume? And Diane's question is sort of tangential of, how do you put that side stuff? Like if you're freelancing, but that's not your full-time gig.
Well, high school, I think we could probably both agree. I mean, gosh, again, there might be some exception where you got your yearbook designer of the year. I don't know what would be if it's an award or something cool that shows you've been doing it for a long time. Wonderful. But otherwise, I think most of it's out the door. Let's keep it, adult to level and up, right? Like what you're doing now. I want to know more about now. And as for the passion projects, freelance obviously can go in there as I wouldn't even use freelance. I would just put it in there as individual projects or
Contract
something.
designer.
Yeah, exactly. Contract.
I don't like
designer.
the word freelance. I think
Can we all agree? Yeah, like nothing to aspire to. It has free in its title. Like, get rid of that one. If you are curious on that, Jeremy Sagel did a great talk. If you want to look him up on the whole idea of like why it's the F word of our business. Like, let's just get rid of that. But the idea of the passion projects, I think there's a really great way to maybe keep those on your portfolio and online, because let the visuals speak for themselves. I think sometimes if they're in the resume, I don't know if you, Diane and Mitch, you might agree, it could look as fluff because you don't have enough just yet. What do you guys think?
I don't agree with that. Again, and this was a slide of my talk. I think that the esoteric work, the personal work, the projects that are not quote unquote graphic design, I think that stuff is super important. Mm-hmm. I think that every designer, every student has, a whiskey bottle design or whatever. It was wine for a while, then it was craft beer. Now we're going to bourbon, right? Mm-hmm. Every student has that project. Every student has the app for the whatever. Everybody's got those things. Not everybody has this super interesting, really weird thing you kind of got super excited about and put in anyway. So I think if it's fluffy, I agree. Don't put in fluff. But if it's a real thing, I would absolutely put it. I would not hesitate.
Don't you think we can do that by showing, because I know, so Mina did this because I keep it in the plastic, but Megan also is amazing collage artist and does all kinds of weird, crazy things. And I just think that we can show people by also incorporating that into what we're
Mhm.
doing. And
No
I mean,
question.
I look at this every day, Mina, right?
Yeah,
There's
absolutely.
great ways to include it on like your portfolio, and I've seen artists be very creative with their very, like, here's me as in my portfolio, but they might have this cool little thing that just says flip side or my 180 or something cool. It's something really fun to put that in there and say, look, I do this too. It is balance. I totally agree. That to me is your way to kind of show where your taste is and where your personal touch is in creativity. Yeah.
I'm also curious. So I'm just thinking about Diane and all of the illustration that she's been getting into and how she used her social media to sort of show that process. And David Walker, who'll be here this afternoon, did a drawing project on Instagram over the past year. But I'd say the two of you definitely have design focused social media accounts. And you said that one of the first things people will do if they're thinking about hiring is Google you. So, is there any advice you'd give for people on managing that social side of things too?
Oh, yes. Um, this is going to
Lay
sound
down the law,
incredibly,
Mitch.
this is going to sound super self-absorbed. I Google myself every single morning, not because I have a huge ego, which I do, not because of that, but because I want to know what people are seeing. I want to know what somebody's Googling me is going to find. I usually open up an incognito window, type in my name in quotes and not in quotes, and see what comes up. Um, and so if there's something coming up you don't want, you need to address that. Now, obviously, if it's just somebody posting an opinion, you can't really do a whole lot. But I think that you've got to pay attention to what you're putting out there. Now, I don't think you should fake who you are. I think if you have opinions about things, then you feel comfortable putting them out there. I think that's fine. Um, some people on this Zoom have put many political opinions out over the past 4 years. I'm not pointing any fingers at myself at all. And a friend of mine was like, you're pissing off all those people who like that person, and I'm like, I can live with that. Like, that's fine. So I think you just have to be upfront with yourself and kind of who you are. But if you're consistently a jerk, or you're consistently sort of demeaning, or you're consistently belittling, or you're just kind of like an unpleasant entity on social, I think you need to reconsider what you're doing, especially when it comes time for jobs. It doesn't mean you can't be those things or you should sort of like fake who you are. Obviously, I'm not suggesting that. But you have to be aware that you have got zero say about how people perceive you. You have zero control over that. So why give them reasons to perceive you in a negative way? That's just kind of my opinion.
Yeah, ditto. And if you need that voice, make it a very private account.
Yeah.
Like, again, remember they will look for you. So if the stuff is out there and you're okay with it, your choice, right? But like, I love what you said, Mitch. It's like, if this is becoming a habit, you really got to reconsider, like, adding some positivity back into things, which is great. I always tell my students too, like, have your personal account that you can share with close friends or family or whatever it is. But if you do make one that is sharing your work and has the design and your taste and all that stuff is what you're curating, just be conscious of it. Yeah.
Yep.
It will be looked at.
So we have just a couple of questions left, and I'm going to try and get to them. Natalie asks if there's any advice for doing all of this side learning while you have a job. So, in terms of making time and finding
Yeah.
motivation, staying on it, or any tips on like where to go first. And Nick, I've put your favorite design resources in the chat already.
Oh, that's a great one. Yeah, someone put together this insane list of like 400 design resources, all categorized. It's really an incredible one. I would say the two ways to look at it. One, you gotta find the time. If this is the make or break to make it into a new industry, and that is your goal, there you have to. I mean, maybe it's a compromise. Something else does go. I've seen people juggle 5,000 different things. I have students that are well into their 30s with kids and a full-time job and doing night classes and doing their homework faster than anybody else and better than anybody else. The examples are there. Be that person. What the advice I would give you is all this stuff we're talking about is available on demand. It's not like you have to tune in at 8 o'clock like a class and be there for that time. You do it in bite-sized chunks. You do it in the way you can. You do it super early in the morning. You do it super late at night, and adjust your schedule.
Yeah, just to add, I agree with all that. I think that learning stuff is a job and you need to treat it like a job. You need to give yourself a schedule. You need to block out. It can be 20 minutes a day. It does not have to be some giant chunk. I personally think that doing like thing a day kinds of
Hmm.
making stuff is really valuable. It's been valuable for me. I'm about to start a new thing, which I'll be tweeting about at some point. But I think that you've got to treat it like a job. It can't fit in when you feel like it. If you've got a goal you're getting to, maybe it's once a week for 2 hours on like a Sunday afternoon, but you've got to really schedule. You've got to say, I am going to do this. It is happening this time. And there we go.
And one of the nice things, Mitch, you mentioned social media, is that social media tends to keep you accountable. I did a
Mhm.
365 project. That's what Diane was holding up, and that accountable, like accountability account on my social media was very, very helpful. The last question that we have is sort of specific, but if you're looking at re-entering the workforce, right, into design, and you graduated almost a decade or even more ago, how might you consider wording work that you've done on the side, maybe not for your full-time job, but that work that you maybe have done on the side as a designer in a new resume? How might you approach that?
Go for Nick.
So if it's old, that's the challenge, right? It feels maybe disconnected to today. Is that kind of where you're going? I
Yeah,
think again,
yeah, a little bit. So like they graduated a long time ago, and they're looking at work that maybe they did
yeah.
on the side. It's not their full-time job.
Think of the timeless values in there that work even today. Pull the trend, pull the timestamp, whatever it is on there. Might look really 90s ish or whatever. I get it. But what you can do is put in the content that still is relevant today. You know, what were your challenges on that? Did you do it under a ton of stress, under a tight deadline, under a very low budget? That's the one thing people love to hear. Is like, tell them you did it on the most limited budget, single-handedly, and you oversaw three contracted freelancers, things like that. Look and see what people, particularly now, you can ask headhunters, recruiters, HR representatives. They're all over LinkedIn right now. Ask them what are keywords that everyone's looking for right now in those skills, and adapt the old stuff to what's more relevant today.
Agreed.
So today, this next session is going to be a little bit of a different format. It'll be a design recharge style interview with Diane Gibbs and Heba Eldecator. I apologize. So Diane Gibbs considers herself a designer first, but she's also an entrepreneur, business owner, consultant, and a college professor. She started her design firm, Little Bird Communications, in August of 2002, just before moving to begin her second career as a design professor at the University of South Alabama in Mobile, Alabama. She also runs the fabulous Design Recharge podcast, which you'll all get a small taste of in just a moment. Nina, are you?
I got it. Yep. Unmuting, and we also have Heba Abdelkader. She is a designer based in San Diego, California, who specializes in building complex web applications, native products, and developing design systems. With a background in architecture, Heba went from helping people navigate physical spaces to helping them navigate digital spaces. Her most recent experience focuses on incorporating artificial intelligence to enhance the user experience. And I will put Heba's website in the chat in just a moment. Diane and Heba, we are so glad to have you here. Take it away.
All right. Well, I'm just going to treat this like it's a regular old Design Recharge podcast or video, whatever. And I'm just going to start like how I normally do. So, Heba, thank you so much for being here and for everybody else. And thank you guys for tuning in. And I love to ask questions. So, you put your questions in the chat and I will get them answered because that's the way I put y'all first. My questions can always be second. But we're going to talk about some of those things that are re-entering into the workforce, pivoting, changing, some of the things that we talked about in the first session. We're going to actually dive into a little bit more because Heba's done that. Heba's done that a couple times, and reinventing ourselves, finding places online to dig in, and what better time to do this than right now. So Heba, can you give us a little bit of your background in design so people kind of know where, because you started in architecture, can you kind of give us a little bit?
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here, and it's really nice to kind of share this knowledge. Thank you so much for asking questions, Diane. My background actually is extensive. I actually had to pivot a bunch of times, as Diane said. I started in architecture. I started in Jordan, Amman, Jordan, and then moved to Florida. I did a couple of years here, and then the housing market crashed. So I had to pivot. I was forced to pivot. I tried a bunch of things. I tried photography. I actually ran a young adult magazine for a while, and then I and then I did graphic design. At the end of my 4-year graphic design schooling, I discovered UX UI design, and that's when I slowly started to introduce myself to it. At the time, like nobody knew what UX UI design was. People thought it was web design. So I'm a self-taught UX UI designer. I have been doing it for a while now, and then UX UI design has been growing into UX and then UI, and now my current title is lead product designer.
So that was really fast for, I mean, it's a lot. So just to kind of, she like totally I was a young adult magazine. So this thing that she did, she went from like nothing being a blog, right? You were just reading a whole bunch of young adult books, and then you grew it substantially. Can you just, because again, this is just not, no, you're just reading and you're writing about it. So you're expressing your opinions in a way on a global platform, and it got traction. Can you just
Yeah.
like, just step into that just a little bit, because I think that that's just hope, right?
Yeah, of course. I think what happens is two things that I had to think about when I was pivoting. One thing is I needed to be in a creative field. You know, I did civil engineering for a little bit, and I hated it because I was bored out of my mind. No shade on civil engineering. I'm just saying that that's what happened. Okay. The next thing is I really wanted to make sure that I was finding a career path that was going to pay me what I'm worth. Right. So those are the two things that were on my mind as I was looking for that career path of mine. Yes, I did photography, self-taught, had to do a lot of research. I am a mom. You know, I am a mom. I am a housewife. At the time when I was in Florida, I had a 4-bedroom home, 3 bathrooms. Like I had to take care of all of that. I was also going to school at the same time. So my time and resources were very limited. So I had to do the best with whatever assets that I had around me. The internet is a great place. It's a great place. Twitter is amazing. Instagram's amazing. Social media networking. Those are your tools. You can do with them what you want. You can either go talk about whatever it is that you want, or you can share the knowledge that you're learning. I chose to share. I chose to share the knowledge. So when
As you learned, right? It
as I
wasn't
was learning, yeah.
after you were an expert, but as you're learning.
After you become an expert, it's a little too late. You know, I think, yeah, it's all because when you're learning something, you have the vocabulary to share it, to share what you're learning with somebody who's going to be learning it. Once you become a professional, now you're using terminology that the youngsters probably don't understand. You know what I mean? And also you're sharing knowledge at a level where you're understanding, you have more empathy towards people who are trying to learn it as well, right? You understand their struggles. So for the young adult magazine, I was reading books. I was enjoying them. I love fantasy books, dystopian novels, and kind of within the realm of creativity. I started wanting to share what I was learning. I was thinking about writing books at the time as well. So I started to write about it, and slowly I grew a blog into a young adult magazine with people writing under me. So that was an interesting adventure. Then I realized like this is not going to be sustainable in the long run. It fulfilled one of the things that I was looking at, but it didn't fulfill the second one, which is getting paid what I'm worth, right? So I needed to pivot. And the next thing I was looking at was universities. What are some of the fields that I can study that are creative and also can provide me with that income or getting paid what I'm worth? So graphic design was the next thing. Here's the thing that I had to deal with graphic design. It's completely different than architecture. So I kind of had to start all over. So that was a challenge that I had to overcome.
Can we talk about that for just a second? Because I think that that mindset is something that, so somebody say pivoting from print to UX UI, they might think, well, I still should be paid what I would be paid maybe at that point, as a, like you're just continuing up, but really you have to start over. And there is some mindset work that you have to go through in your brain, maybe not about your worth, you're still maybe worth more than just somebody entering the field, but you have to, there's humility that comes into this. And this is part of what I think is great about your story, is that you've continued to like be able to reset and like, what do I need to learn, and coming in as that that eager learner, that rookie, even though you might have been in the industry for 10 or 15 years.
Okay, so here is, I'm actually on the side during my free time. I mentor multiple students for Springboard, Design Lab, even on my own ADP list. And the students that approach me are not just students who are studying, they're young ones that are getting into the field, but also students who are pivoting careers. And here's the thing that I tell them: you're not starting all over. You're not, you have so much experience. Why remove all the experience that you had before? That's something that I did. I had experience in architecture. I will not start as like an intern or a junior level. If you put it in your mind that that's where you're going to start, then that's where you're going to start. But if you sell yourself, if you brand yourself as, hey, I'm a designer, I have 5 or 6 years of design experience, but I also have maybe 1 or 2 years of UX experience. If you're starting, or if you have been teaching yourself for the past year, or if you've been doing some passion projects. So that's kind of how I would approach it. And that's usually what I recommend my students to do is, hey, don't, negate all of the experience that you have, especially if you are in the design field. If you're in psychology, that's another good field to pivot into UX UI design. So I actually help students come up with strategies on how they can market themselves, but when they're trying to enter the UX UI field using the experience that they had before.
Just so you know, it's raining really hard and my dog really hates thunder, so I'm just really hoping he doesn't go crazy. But
Okay.
but one of the things is that I think that there's a misnomer that we think that we are this thing, but I feel like I'm always reinventing myself because I find something new that I like and I want to try this. So how can we embrace that kind of curiosity? And do you see yourself as always reinventing yourself, or do you see yourself as like getting to this point?
Okay, so do you remember once upon a time when I was taking a break from work to take care of my baby, and I started doing a course called Start with Why by Simon Sinek? So, yes, I will forever be thankful for that course, even though we didn't go through the whole thing, but we went through enough of it for me to understand what is my personal mission statement. And I'm going to read it for everybody so that you guys can see how my mission statement is present in everything that I do. So my mission statement is, I am human on a journey to discovering how people's heritage, tradition, and culture influences the way they problem solve, and applying my findings to UX design. So this is my personal mission statement. No matter where I go, no matter what I do, it's always infused in everything that I do. So for example, my video podcast, Hiba by Design, focuses on culture, design, and UX. It focuses on how does your upbringing influence the way that you problem solve, and how can we promote diversity in teams. There you go. Clubhouse. I just recently joined Clubhouse, and I host a panel every Friday at 6 p.m. Pacific time. Shameless plug-in. But it focuses on that diversity, inclusion, creativity. How can we help you learn more about the field? How can we bring professionals and make them accessible to people who are pivoting or starting their careers? That is my mission statement. I focus on diversity. I focus on culture. I focus on allowing people to come into the industry. How can I elevate people? Yeah.
So Megan had a great question. How do we promote diversity in our teams?
I have been extremely fortunate to always be to have a voice on the table when we're adding new hires. So if you're part of a team that is providing you with that opportunity, I think that that's when you start to say, like, hey, I think, this candidate would be a great addition because of 1, 2, and 3, right? And one of them is the fact that they have a different background, right? So I think that I excelled in teams that were flat versus hierarchical. I'm not going to be able to say
hierarchical.
Yes,
I think that's close.
Yes. And one of the things that I look at when I'm joining teams is I'm looking for mentorship. So I'm always looking for a lead designer that is going to share knowledge, mentor me, because there is always room to grow. And then at the same time, me mentor the intermediate and junior level, even interns. And I think when we're in a flat team, making sure that everybody is heard, you're learning faster, you're elevating people. Now, they say you're as strong as your weakest link, right? So if your weakest link is being elevated because they're part of the conversation, then you're a stronger team overall. So ask your manager or ask your team lead, like, hey, I know we're hiring 1, 2, 3 positions. Can I be part of those interviews? And then if you become part of those interviews, then you can give feedback, and your feedback can talk about, hey, how can we diversify our team?
I love that. It's also, I think, creating a space even before it gets to an interview, before you have to add somebody else in, so that you're asking people about how they're feeling, checking in, instead of it just being at these big moments. I know that at where I work, somebody feels comfortable enough to tell me, even when we're not even hiring. It's just, I feel uncomfortable doing blank. And I think that that's really important to create that kind of atmosphere. And you create that from day one, or if you didn't create it on day one, you can start today, because today's a new day, I believe.
100%. And here's my story. When I moved to the United States, I was born here, by the way, but I lived overseas in Jordan. And when I moved back to the United States, my community has told me, you're passing enough, stay under the radar to avoid discrimination. Yes. I feel like I've shared this with you. So your face is like interesting. So yeah, I was under the radar for a really, really, really long time. Until I surrounded myself by people who actually started to ask questions or were interested, and made me feel safe to start to share. And then I realized the more I shared, the more they shared, the more common grounds we found. And then what happened was we were building this safe space. So now I try to initiate that safe space wherever I go. So, I try to talk about the weird things that I go through, or I talk about my religion if I need to, and I do it in a way where it's non-judgmental, and I'm not trying to impose it on you, but like, hey, this is me. This is what I'm going through right now. Like right now, we're in the middle of Ramadan. I'm fasting. So I share that with people. Then people, oh, can you tell me a little bit more? Like how long are you going to fast for? Like how long is this for? And how do you celebrate at the end? And so on and so forth. So initiating a safe space is something that I found very successful. And then what happens is the people around you now, they're looking for things that are different and weird. Like weird is my favorite word, right? That they're gonna share with you.
Okay. I love that. And I think that's a way, like what Mitch was talking about before, it's a way to stand out. It's also a way to bring people up as you are blazing the trail. So I want to ask you a question about, because you have a lot of tips and tactics that you have learned, you have used. So you have some for Slack, you have some for LinkedIn, and just for moving to a new place or getting involved in doing conferences, going online, ADP lists. There's a lot of things you've done. Can you kind of tell us some of those things that you've been able to do to get noticed?
Yeah. So that's a loaded question. So let's start with networking. Networking, everything revolves. All of this revolves around networking, and networking is so important. I will say this forever and ever and ever. Every single position that I've landed, every contract that I've gotten has been word of mouth and has been through somebody that has known me. It has not been through me applying digitally. It has yet to happen, right? And this is why, especially when I was moving from Florida to San Diego, again, my goal was I wanted to find a job before I graduated. So I did everything in my power to make sure that I'm standing out versus the students that were around me. So what did I do? First thing, I was in a graphic design program. Everybody was focusing on print. So then I pivoted to digital design, product design, UX, UI design. That alone has made me stand out. The next thing is I was starting to attend conferences. So preparing for those conferences, when you prepare for a conference, this is my strategy around preparing for a conference. I go and I look at the panel list, or I look at all the speaker list. I go follow them everywhere. Right? You follow them everywhere. You read some of their latest work. You look at everything that they've done, just in case you encounter them, then you have something to talk about, right? The next thing I did for conferences is, and as a student, I worked on a side project that no one else has worked on. So I came prepared to this conference. So I was able to share it with professionals that were there already trying to market myself. So doing all those things, once I got to the conference, and I try to do this with every conference that I do, minus the side projects, but as a student that worked for me, is be prepared. Be prepared. Speak to people about projects that you're passionate about things that you've accomplished, about your goals, and start to do those things before your conference so that you have something to show once you get there. I was moving to San Diego, so I needed to find work before getting here, right? So what I did was I started to look. I was part of AIGA Orlando, and I was also part of Creative Mornings Orlando. So I already knew of 2 national communities that I was part of that could be also in San Diego. So I went and I joined San Diego AIGA, joined Creative Mornings San Diego, and then I started to look for a digital design community in San Diego that I can be a part of, and that's how I found the San Diego Digital Designers Slack channel. And there they had a job post. There's like 100 people at the time. Job post, they were looking for an interactive designer. I was the only one that was there, So, and the hiring manager was the person that posted it, and it was for CBS Local. I mean, how interesting was that, right? So because I was able to have a conversation with him before I did the official interview, it kind of gave me a leg up, right?
Wait, did you have a Zoom meeting, or did you have a phone call, or just texting via Slack?
First, we texted via Slack. I showed him my portfolio, and then he scheduled an interview with me. So I had scheduled an interview. They actually did a design test for me. And then I did a third interview to meet the team, and then I got the job. And at the time, it wasn't just the only job that I got. I actually got offered a position with Disney, but it was in San Diego, in Orlando, and that I got through LinkedIn. And by LinkedIn, there are so many tips and tricks, and I know you and I did a full episode on that. So if anyone's interested, you guys can go watch that episode for sure on Design Recharge.
I was trying to find it, but we have an anonymous attendee question, so it kind of goes backtrack a little bit. But I'll find that episode so that they can go to it directly. Do you think that your cultural background helped you become more empathetic towards team members?
100%. Yes, definitely. It has made me more empathetic. I think, a recent story that happened was someone from across the pond, um, young designer, doesn't know any better, has taken someone else's work and has used it as their own, right? And that person was very angry, like, this is my work, like, you shouldn't be using my work. And, the community became angry, and, they started kind of swarming that person and were trying to kind of like cancel their account and all of that. And I was scared at first. I was really scared at first because I was like, okay, well, I have another perspective that I want to share. But, once an angry mob has happened, like, it's really difficult to kind of infiltrate that. So finally, like, I was able to find like a safe space with a colleague, and I was like, hey, you know, people outside of the US do not understand copyright infringement. They are low income. You know, they're probably struggling. I lived in a third world country. I actually come from Palestine. There's a lot of poverty. So I understand what people have to do to kind of make a little bit of money. And I felt like if we would have maybe reached out to that person and been like, hey, we see your previous work. We see that you have some kind of, talent. You just need to grow it, because this person had their own work at the beginning and then started taking other people's work and using it as their own. So if it was me, I would have kind of like had a conversation with that person. I would have been like, hey, like, please remove my work. But I'm more than happy to kind of give you some criticism or constructive criticism on how to make your own work better. And I think that that would have made a better relationship, like a one-on-one, and a better relationship with that person. And that person will get educated. And then that person is going to educate someone else. And then those two people are going to educate. And then it's just going to be kind of like, I don't know, exponential growth.
Instead of being something they're ashamed of and they're never going to tell anybody about that experience, they're
Yeah.
now like taking this as you were loving and teaching at the same time, right? That's maybe a better way. And it is, there's lots of people that it's not the same. Copyright, yeah, absolutely. Mina said teachable moment.
Yeah.
So I put the link in the chat. It's rechargingyou.com/319. And so, or 319. So you can go and check out if you want all the LinkedIn tips. And LinkedIn is always changing, but you did spend a lot of time in LinkedIn. So did you have a strategy for as you're pivoting, and that what you spent on social media, what you posted, how much you, one thing, I was talking to a recent alumni and they said, oh, I'm not ready to post anything. And I was like, I don't care if you post anything. I really want you to reach out and comment, smartly. I don't know, it's not a really good word, but to on other people's posts and what they've done, so that you're telling them that you understand good things about design and you understand how to talk about design. It's not just about you posting and hoping to get, responses. It's also about you being present on somebody else's post as well. And you were I think, very strategic and very tactical about when you have been at these stages. Can you talk a little bit about that and how much time you put into that?
Yeah, so it was very intuitive. It's not like something that this alone was very intuitive. It wasn't something that I learned from a book or a podcast. But for LinkedIn, my strategy was very interesting. Some might not like it, but this was the way that I approached it, and I think was very successful. For LinkedIn, I removed anybody that was not design related. Okay, and then what I did was I made sure that my profile image was an interesting image. That was very important to me. I needed my profile image to showcase me as a person, but at the same time to showcase that I'm a designer, right? The next thing that I did was I went and I looked for my idols and I requested them. And with a request, you can send a little message. This is why I think it's very important for you to research the people that you're going to connect with. So one of the main people that are my idols is Debbie Millman, and I requested her and I sent her a nice message, and I love Debbie Millman, and she accepted my request. Now I became second to everybody she's connected to, right? So now anyone else that I idolize, that I want to connect with, they're gonna see that I'm second. Automatically, that builds some kind of credibility for who I am, and the chances are going to increase for them to accept my connection. And that's kind of how I built my LinkedIn. Now, obviously, like I actually will connect with any. If you guys want to connect with me, it's LinkedIn/IM/Hero by Design, and I try to connect with as many people as possible that request me, because if they're requesting me, that means that they've seen something, that means I have added value, that means that I can help them moving forward, right? So that was my LinkedIn strategy at the time, and it still is. Now I try to connect with everyone that I meet. So like everyone that's on the panel, or everyone that is on the speaker list, I will make sure to connect with them on LinkedIn, on Instagram, Clubhouse, if you guys are on Clubhouse, all the social medias, because it's a seed that we're planting that eventually will grow, and we're going to kind of like reap the fruits. That's kind of how I think about it. There was a second part for your question about strategy. Oh, social media strategy. Social media strategy. For example, I feel like I'm an early adopter for things that require less time. Again, I am mom. I'm a home taker, home caregiver. Anyways, you know what I mean.
We totally know what you mean.
Yeah. So time is very sparse, and I always try to think of ways, okay, how can I do things that don't require too much editing, you know what I mean? So for example, when Instagram Live started, I thought that was perfect. It was better than YouTube required so much editing, so much pre-planning, so much post-planning. It was not something that I was sustainable. So once Instagram Live started, I started doing it every day, sharing my knowledge, sharing the work that I was doing. And that actually helped me practice. And when Adobe approached me to do Adobe Live, I already had this experience doing live episodes, that it made it very easy for me to go on their platform and do the Adobe Live sessions.
Wait, I want to just, so this can be very like, oh, I don't want to be on camera. I maybe with Zoom in 2020, everybody's over that. But I think that as you start, like it's three people, like just talk to those three people and then you get more comfortable. And if you make a mistake, it's okay. Like it just shows your humanness. So was there because it seems like a lot of times you have had courage when other people just fall back into fear. So is there something that allows you to, because it seems like you just have a clarity that there's only three people as I'm getting started. It's not like I have to freak out and have to have everything all together. Can you talk just about like that mindset or that mental capacity as you start something like that?
Yeah, so here's the thing. I do my best not to do things for other people. I do it for myself. So whether it's 10 people or whether it's no people, the doing was for myself. I was doing it for myself. It was for me to put myself out there. It's for me to practice. It's for me to learn how to articulate concepts. It's helped me at work. Whenever I'm trying to portray a message, it made it very easy for me. It's helped me with interviewing. Like it's helped me with so many things that you don't realize that it's going to help you with. Put it out there. Anybody, everyone who is in this group right now, everyone in the chat knows more than everyone else around them. There's something you know more about. There's high school students, there are college students, there's someone you know more than. So why not share what you know, right? It definitely helps. It helps a lot. I know I did when I did the online magazine, it was a small little seed that helped me build my video podcast, which was also live. I did minimal like editing for that, but it helped me figure out like how do I reach out to people, obviously with your mentorship, you helped out a lot. How do I this was a podcast I was starting from scratch. Like, how am I going to get people to say yes to this? So being able to brand that, put an idea out there, send out emails, but send out follow-up emails, set up video calls, look for editing tools and so on and so forth. I think that a seed that I did, 5 years in advance, was fruitful 5 years later, right? So you never know. I think it's very important to plant little seeds. You never know when you're going to reap their benefits. And the video podcast is something that is unique for me. It's I still reap the benefits from that video podcast because it's something that I can talk about whenever I'm going on interviews. I say like, hey, I host a video podcast. It's about this, this, and that. And it makes me a unique candidate. So what are your side projects? What are some of the fun things that you're trying to do on the side that will make you different? Now I'm doing Clubhouse. So if you don't want to show your face, like it took me an hour to do my hair today. Put on some makeup, with the pandemic, my hair is back to like super curly and wild. So Clubhouse is very minimal effort. I put in maybe an hour to prepare for it. And then the Clubhouse itself lasts between 1.5 to 2.5 hours. And on it, to be very, very honest, it goes by super, super fast. And then I don't run the rooms on my own. Actually, the strategy by having a panel is by design, because the panel knows more than me. I might be able to add here and there, but being able to kind of have a conversation around the dinner table is more enjoyable. You can get more out of it than like me talking at people. So I think that's also another way of doing it. So if you don't want to be on camera, then, Clubhouse, then Twitter is doing their own thing. You can find it. The best thing that I can advise is take advantage of those social medias. When use social media for your advantage, and what happens is when people start to search for you, they're going to see that you're talking about design. It's going to create credibility, right, for you as somebody who knows what they're doing.
Yeah. Okay, I love that. So this kind of goes back to that re-entry person, and I just want to. This wasn't in the order, but you know me, I kind of mix it up. We got time, so I want to cover this one. So big gaps. So big gaps so I think Nick kind of touched on this last session. I have somebody that I'm coaching that's in Portugal from South Africa. Originally, he's done a ton, totally not in design, but he's always kind of had his hand in, been an illustrator, doing things, but he's definitely more strategy focused. And so understanding how to like make those applicable, right? Those things are really important. And it's a lot about design thinking. He's really poured in. We've done a lot of work. He's done a lot of work all on his own about just learning more about design and the aspects of brand strategy and things that he needs. But how would you tell somebody who has a big gap? Now, there's 2 big gaps that I can think of that you've had with, well, not 2 for you, but one being a mom, right? You've had 2 kids at 2 different times. And, but then there's also people who in COVID have lost their jobs. And I think that there's a lot of grace given. I would think if I was hiring, I wouldn't even think of this as like a gap. If I'm on the other side of the table trying to hire somebody with COVID, but I think that as confidence is dwindled, as you are, you're like, no, oh my gosh, I lost my job, or oh my gosh, I haven't stayed up with my skills if I was a mom and I've taken 10 years off or something. Can you just talk about how you would encourage somebody, or what kind of tactics you would tell them to explain those big gaps?
Yeah. So the biggest gap that I've had was a year. I can't speak for anybody who has had bigger gaps. Here's my recommendation. My recommendation is, by the way, I've seen oh God, I think it's a TikTok. I'm so sorry, but it's a TikTok, and it's about it's about the best LinkedIn that's out there. And it was a professional mom who put in her LinkedIn description that for 1 year, she was working as a mother for her child. And those were her responsibilities, and she made it super professional because it is a full-time job when you have a newborn. That first year or two is a full-time job. You are, you're a personal assistant, you are a manager, you are like, you're doing all of these things, right? So how do you brand yourself, right? So this, she branded herself, and this is how she marketed it. So how do you take something and you brand it and market it in a way that would, like, spin it in a way that the person in front of you is going to see value in it? Um, and what I think for the bigger gaps, I definitely would recommend. I know for UX UI designs, especially after having my child, I did go and I did do a boot camp. I did General Assembly for a while, and I didn't take the course because I didn't know how to do UX UI. It helped me build that terminology. It helped me put down that process, right? It helped me put together a project that I wouldn't have known how to do, right? So education is good. Take your time as you need to educate, take your time while you're trying to educate yourself, but education is really good. Side projects are really, really, really good. Putting yourself out there, networking. And when I say networking, I'm talking about building sincere, genuine relationships versus like, oh, I'm just making different acquaintances, right? And it's funny because networking now has helped me so much. We were just talking about this earlier today, and if I'm encountering a project that I've never done before, and I know one of my colleagues or somebody that I've met that has done it and knows better, then it's so easy for me to reach out to them and be like, even though they can say no, right? I reach out to them and be like, hey, I'm doing this, being vulnerable. I'm doing this, and that. I've never done this before. Do you mind getting on a call with me for an hour? And can you walk me through your strategy or how you would approach it? And honestly, just joining Clubhouse, I've met a few people that as soon as I sent them that message, the day of, they were like, hey, I'm free in about 2 hours. Or the next day, hey, Hiba, I'm free after like 5:30 p.m. And I was like, oh my God, I was so shocked. Like they actually made time for me because we built not just a colleague relationship, but an actual genuine relationship.
Do you remember, and this I guess for anybody, but do you remember the first time you ordered your own food at like McDonald's? Like that was like a big step, and your mom standing there, your dad or somebody, whoever took you to McDonald's, and you're like, hamburger mustard only, please, and maybe you said it really quiet. I just think it's good to have somebody beside you who's like, she doesn't want any ketchup or any pickles or any cheese on this hamburger, right? Like they're there and they've got your back if you're there. But I think sometimes that's what this is. And I have a tactic that I try to meet a new friend every week. And I've done pretty good for like the last 3 years. I've made a new friend every week. And I'll just message somebody, like we'll be in one of the groups, and I see something that's a connection, and I'm not trying to sell them anything. I have had people like, what did you want to meet about? I'm like, I just wanted to make a new friend. Like that's it. And I think that it would be great if we had that grade school kind of approach of like, hey, I don't want anything. I just want to see if me and you play well together. And I think that is something that if people could adapt that or adapt it, whatever, one letter off. Yeah, I didn't go through my spell check in my brain. But if we do that, then I think that we all will be more empathetic. We will all understand. We'll know about what other people are doing. And then if we do have a problem or we need something, we can reach out to people, and people are very willing to help. And I just think that people are more willing to help than they are to lay shame down. And so I just think that it's a good tactic. We could all just love a little bit more. And that's it's a very, so that little kid inside you that had to order for the first time is that same little kid that's trying to like, I don't know, should I ask Debbie Millman to be my friend on LinkedIn? Or, like it's just those fears. I think we just have to face it. Gay Hendricks wrote a book called The Big Leap. I read it a couple summers ago, and it said there was the thing in your body with fear and excitement. It's the same, whatever chemical makeup. I'm definitely not a scientist. But if you breathe through it, then it's excitement. You just have to you have to add oxygen in, and if you hold your breath, that's fear. And so I think when we're in these situations, we just need to try. If they say no, then move on to the next person. Then think that as a gift that you did not have to meet with somebody who didn't want to meet with you.
I
Anyway,
think I think give before you ask. The more you give, it'll come back. You will reap what you sow. That's why like I'm donating so much of my time mentoring, because not because of anything. I'm not even expecting anything out there. I genuinely want to help people. Like I want you, because I didn't have that, when I was a student or when I was younger. I didn't have that. So being available for people, answering all of their questions, quality over quantity. My Instagram doesn't have that many people. That's by design as well. It's private by design as well, because the people that are on there are people who have kind of like what we were saying about LinkedIn, like they've seen me somewhere, they've added me. Maybe I can help them in the future. They might want to reach out to me. I think one of the things, the strategies, is kind of like what you were saying. If it scares me, that means I'm on the right path, right? And one of the things that I preach, because it has proven time and time again as very beneficial, is if there's something you want, then ask for what you want.
talk about that. Can you, because that was my next question. So
Okay.
this is where courage, as you're talking about this before, you said everybody was doing print when you were doing your undergrad. You decided to stand out, and you did UX UI, or you did more digital. And then this is hard to ask. And this is like that little kid in, I don't know, maybe I had to ask for a special hamburger because I don't like ketchup. So maybe that's where I'm bringing into McDonald's. But like, it's hard to ask for something that you want. And I think we revert a lot to those old stories or something that we've told. You have had a great ability to like dispel the old story as just a story, that it's not going to happen, or I'm just going to give it a try. Can you talk about the courage? And then I know there's many instances, but one instance of you saw, you thought you wanted to speak at a conference that we both could to called Creative South, and Mina goes there too. So can you talk a little bit about how you approached the founder and
Mhm.
asked him, and how
Yeah.
you get that courage to do that?
Oh God. The courage is the hard part. But yeah, uh so I want to start with every podcast that I've been a part of. In the beginning, even the speaking on in a conference was something that I asked for. So when we got on Design Recharge the first time, I believe we talked, and then I was like, "Hey, I would love to be a part of Design Recharge." Same thing with the Creative South podcast, and same with there's another podcast that it escapes my mind, but the speakers or the hosts of that podcast. Oh, the Master of One podcast. I remember they met me the year after, and they were like, we were so shook that this little girl, because they're giants, came to us and like, oh, I want to be on your podcast, and they were just looking at me like, but who are you, like? And I was like, someone that has something to say. I'm not sure what it is, but I will figure it out by the time my episode comes. You know what I mean? So, um, so what had happened, and the story that Diane's talking about, is when I was still a student and I prepared for that conference, the Creative South conference, did the project, researched all of the speakers. I remember attending the conference, and I attended the conference with a group of my student body. We were around 50 students, and we went to all of the workshops, we went to all of the speakers' sessions, and I noticed that the even though the student body was at the time, it was like a good chunk of the attendees, the content was not directed towards them. And what I saw was the year that was coming after, we were gonna be double the students. So I felt like that there was going to be a gap in information, and I wanted to bridge that gap and actually talk about how can you transition or how can you enter the workforce. So I approached the organizer, huge man, um, big teddy bear. And I remember talking to my girlfriends. I was like, I want to ask. And they were like, oh my God, you should. And I was like, but I'm scared. And then they were like, just go do it. So I remember I snuck to, backstage, saw the organizer, and basically asked him, I said, hey, I noticed that there's a gap. And no, I started with, I would like to speak next year. And then I got into why. And he was like, you got it. Just because you had the balls to ask, you got it. You know how many people are too scared to like ask that question? And I was like, oh my God, this is crazy. So that was like a memory that I will forever be grateful for. And it was the same feeling that I had before starting my video podcast. When I started the By Design podcast, it took me 2.5 years to build the courage. I had that idea for 2.5 years, and I talked about it for 2.5 years before I actually put it out there. So if something scares you, kind of like what Diane was saying, it just means that you're on the right path. You're onto something good.
Love that. So we don't have a ton of time left, but I don't see lots of other questions in the chat. Obviously, anybody can ask a question, but I still have more because I am an overpreparer. But does anybody? Okay, I'll just plop in. You got to jump quick, people, because I'm a fast talker. I mean, there's no waiting around. But I gave you time just now. You could have interrupted. But anyway, here we go. So there are some sacrifices I think that we make to do this. You sacrificed time and sleep because you didn't sacrifice your kids or eating or spending time with them or taking care of them. And you didn't sacrifice not going to class and things like that. So can you talk about which sacrifices were beneficial for you that you felt like you could make?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I believe that sleep is so difficult to have, but if you put yourself on a schedule, it's really good. I remember a time before the pandemic, my schedule was literally wake up at 5, work out for an hour, get the kids ready for school, drop them off to school to be at work, earlier than 9 because I was doing the video podcast. I would get to work, sit outside, do my Instagram live for about 20 minutes, and then go into the office and start my day, my work day, and then work, and then pick up the kids, go grocery shopping, come home, cook dinner, do homework, put them to bed, literally have an hour for myself to read, work on side projects, whatever it is. And then the weekends, everybody has weekends. The way I structure my weekends now, my mornings are for myself to kind of breathe, do whatever I want, go hiking, meditate, do an activity that I like to do, go to the beach, whatever it is. The mornings are for me, go on a brunch date with my friends. And then in the afternoon, I do mentoring sessions. I do any excess work that I have, any side projects that I'm working on. And that's kind of how I structure my day. So I try my best to do a lot of the, right now, my boy's dad and I share custody. So I actually have more time than I did before. And I use that time very strategically. So I'm doing things to either learn or share knowledge, giving back, or to help me kind of continue to maintain myself and my body. With the pandemic, I've gained the 15 pounds. I mean, who hasn't? So, we need to get back on there. But yeah, I think that's time is really difficult. And some days I feel a little burnt out, but it's okay to forgive yourself. Like the podcast, I did the podcast for 1 season and I can't get myself to do it again. I just can't do it. I just don't have the time and energy to do it. So at first I was really, really upset that I was holding that as like in my heart. It was heavy on my heart. And then I had to kind of like sit with myself and say, no, it's okay. It's okay to kind of put it on pause until you're ready for it again.
So so Megan had a question about self-care. So how do you navigate self-care? So are you listening to your intuition? Are you trying to not have a negative self-talk or talk bad, like you should be doing this? Hiba, come on, do it, right? It's about accepting, hey, this is as far as I can go today, and I'll just try to do better
Nice.
tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my God. Imposter syndrome is a thing. Like it's a real thing, no matter how experienced you are, no matter how good you are. Imposter syndrome is a major thing. Definitely. We're all going to experience it. And that's one thing that I remind myself when I'm approaching people to talk to. They're just people. They're just as scared as I am, and how flattering it is to get approached by somebody and be like, hey, like, I love your work. Like, they're human beings. Like, they're going to take that, like, oh my God, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. So, one thing for me is I, oh Lord, how many years ago? I remember something had happened where I was taking on the workload alone with the boys, and my son had forgotten his backpack at home, and we were rushing out of the house, and I wasn't gonna have time to take it to go back and get it to school, and I was upset with him, and I kind of like reprimanded him, and it wasn't worth it. Like I remember like driving to work after dropping him off and crying, just crying, because I was like, I just made my son upset all day over a backpack. Like it's just a backpack. You know what I mean? Like he forgot it one day. It's not a pattern that he has. It's just a backpack. I worked him all up. I got worked all up. And for what? And I during that ride is when I realized that I'm one of the fortunate people that I do have positive self-talk. Like I do have that subconscious that kind of nurtures me. And I was, wondering like what went through my upbringing that actually created that positive self-talk, and how can I make that present in my children's upbringing, right? Like how can I bring that, make it a part of them? And it's such a shame because I think like I was like 29 or 30 once I realized it. So it's never too late, people.
Right. And I think the things that we tell ourselves, whether it's before we go on an interview, I know when me and Mina and Catherine Moore and Victor were on, we did a Amy Cuddy power pose, like stood like this for a while behind stage before we went on stage. And I think that's, or Wonder Woman, if you don't want to show your armpits or something, but like nobody has to see you, and it's just something that helps you. There's lots of other tactics that you can do. And I think my cat is snoring so bad. She clearly needs a breathe right or like a CPAP machine. I don't know if you can hear her, but it's super loud. But I just think that what you've been able to do, whether it's at 29 or if somebody's 15 or 18 or 59, I think that we just need to, I have a tactic, I call it a potty wall. You guys can totally steal this. You take all the Post-its that are the color that you don't like. So say you don't like orange or something. And then you write, okay, so you write all the things that you are either saying to yourself or you've heard from a client say that are really loud. And then where you go to the bathroom. So the boys will maybe put it facing the wall, and we're going to put it on the other wall because we sit down to go to the bathroom. Anyway, so we're seeing it often, and especially in the pandemic, it's been great because you always use the same bathroom, more than likely. So then you post on top of those all good things that your friends or clients are saying. So you're covering over the bad, and you're reading, you're going to remember, and you're going to see those over and over and over. And I hope your wall is covered with Post-its. Again, this is AIGA is not sponsored by McDonald's or Post-it. 3M, these are just tools that I use, but I think that potty wall, it's like what you see. And David talked about this earlier, what you see, what you do today will help you tomorrow. And I think it's about what are you telling yourself? If you're telling yourself I'm too short or whatever, I'm never gonna get taller, like I'm just
Here's one, sorry to interrupt you.
No, I'm done. Go ahead. I just go on and on.
maybe this is like a good like wrapping up, but here's a good saying that I live by, and it's proven itself time and time again. Everything happens for a reason, and it always happens for the best. The always happens for the best part is the most important part. So if you blindly trust that it's happening for the best, no matter what it is that you're going through, you know, you're going to realize that maybe in 5 years, 10 years. I mean, when I was doing architecture and the housing market crashed and, you know, I didn't get accepted into a master's program, I was devastated, like ugly crying in a library. Everybody thought somebody died. Like it was the worst thing ever. And now look, it's been, I don't know how many years, over a decade. And I'm like, wow, like I love this career that I'm in. Like it happened for the best, right? You know, we all went through a pandemic, we lost our jobs, but so many people found passions, they started businesses, you know, they spent so much time with their children. For me personally, me and the boys were able to do family therapy. We did family therapy 3 times a week, and it helped us, you know, it helped bring us back together. Like we learned so much. We were able to kind of like build a foundation. And I think that if it wasn't for that disaster that happened, you know, we wouldn't be where we are now. So everything happens for a reason, and it always happens for the best. That's kind of what I live by.
Love that. So you can find Hiba at, she has her links. I think maybe you can share them, but I shared some of them earlier. Let's see. Um,
So I'm on all social media at Hiba by Design. That's also my podcast website. My personal UX UI portfolio site is hiba.me, and Hiba is HEB as in boy AH.me. And then ADP list. If you need mentoring, please feel free to get on ADP list, plug in my name, Hiba Abdul Kader, or Hiba by Design, and you'll find me on there. I'm booked a little bit out, but you know, we'll make time for you. And then if you have any other questions, Instagram is the best way to reach me versus email. So add me on Instagram and send me a message. I'm usually very responsive within 24 hours.
Love it. And if you guys like what this was like, this is what I do every Wednesday at 2:30 Eastern time and 11:30 Pacific time. And you can find it at rechargingyou.com, or you can find me anywhere on at Design Recharge or Creatives Ignite, or C Diane Gibbs, because my first name starts with C, and I don't tell anybody what it is because I don't like the name, but it's just where I explore things. But there's some amazing people up here on stage. I hope that you got, or whatever it's called, the thing. I hope you guys follow them, because I am following them, and can't wait to see David talk later today, because he also shared, he ran like for so many days because something was chasing him, clearly. No, I'm just kidding. He nothing was chasing him, but he not only did he do a lettering project, he also was running, and he shared both of those. I can't wait to talk to him about that stuff. He's super inspiring as well. Anyway, back to y'all. Thanks for letting us play here today, and thanks for giving us the stage.
Thank you both, Hiba and Diane. This was phenomenal, as are the two of you. And thanks also to Mitch and Nick. So now we have a 30-minute break. So we'll regroup back here at 2:30, where we will have a panel led by Kelly Walters on interviewing, which will include David John Walker, David Hisaya Asari, and Gabby Hernandez. So please join us then, and we'll see you soon.
All right, folks. Hope you had a good break, had a chance to get some food or go for a walk, play with your pets, whatever you needed to do during that break. I'm Li-Shan Huang, Design Education Manager here at AIGA. I just wanted to share again that we are recording this session. We'll be sharing it after the event, after we've done some editing and also some captioning to make it more accessible. We had some technical difficulties with the live captioning this morning. Also wanted to remind you all that this event, like all AIGA events, is covered under our code of conduct that is meant to help us maintain a harassment-free, safe, inclusive environment for everyone. I'll post a link to that again if you want to refer to it. But that's all I have for now for the announcement. So I will turn it over to Megan and Mina to introduce our next speakers.
Thank you so much, Lishan. So we had a wonderful, I guess, early afternoon, depending on where you are in the world, just before this. But up next is a panel discussion on interviewing moderated by Kelly Walters. So she is a designer, educator, and researcher whose work investigates Black cultural vernacular in mainstream media. She is the founder of Bright Polka Dot, an interdisciplinary design practice that works across platforms to create exhibitions, installations, publications, and digital design experiences for cultural and commercial institutions. The work of Bright Polka Dot and Kelly Walters has been recognized by Graphice, It's Nice That, Communication Arts, The One Club, and AIGA's Eye on Design. In her ongoing design research, she interrogates the complexities of identity formation, systems of value, and the shared vernacular in and around Black visual culture. She's the author of Black, Brown, and Latinx Designers, Conversations on Design and Race, and the Associate Director of the BFA of Communication Design program at Parsons School of Design in New York. On our panel is also Gabby Hernandez, who is a Costa Rican designer, researcher, and educator, currently working as an assistant professor of graphic design at the University of Florida. Her national and international research and creative practice navigate various fields that are interconnected: social design, community-based design, design research, horizontality, decoloniality, identity, and anti-racism, and their relation with design pedagogy. Her work has been disseminated and published widely in multiple national and international conferences, summits, and design journals. Her Latina identity and her work on decentering traditional design canons and context-based design have directly informed her numerous AIGA leadership roles, including 5 years of service for the AIGA Design Educators Community Steering Committee, whoop, whoop, and the AIGA Diversity and Inclusion Task Force. She is currently working on self-exploratory and autoethnographic identity practices through visual storytelling and visual essaying. And Mina will introduce our Davids.
Yes, thank you, Megan. I'm Mina, and I get to introduce the Davids. So first up, we have David Hisaya Asari. He's a graphic designer and design educator based in Oakland, California. He is at California College of the Arts. He's faculty for graphic design, critical ethnic studies, and special programs as well. He's taught graduate design first-year program and pre-college, leads a Japan study abroad course. His graphic design studio course focuses on information visualization. He's co-chair of FOCA, the Faculty of Color Alliance. His design experience ranges from information graphics, exhibition design, environmental design, wayfinding systems, to branding, editorial design, books, and packaging. In addition to his own practice, David has worked for over a decade as a senior designer at the San Francisco office of Pentagram with Kit Henricks. President America, that throws me every time. It makes me so excited. President Emeritus of AIGA San Francisco, David continues to serve on the board of directors there. He's also served as an advisor to San Francisco Design Week and is a member of the AIGA Design Educators Community Steering Committee. We also have with us David John Walker, who's a graphic designer and associate professor of graphic design at Austin Peay State University in Clarksville, Tennessee. He is also principal of Realistic Design, a design consultancy that is active locally and nationally. As a sought-after Black creative, Walker works with national political candidates, PACs, large nonprofits, governmental entities, and varying businesses, lending his talents to their marketing efforts to increase awareness and further campaigns. His works have been recognized by GDUSA, the Reed Awards, Typism, AIGA, and IABC. He examines social cues and historical past to shape the aesthetic of the visual voice for personal lettering projects. welcome to our panelists. Kelly, I'm going to kick it over to you.
Thank you, Mina and Megan, for an awesome introduction for everyone. And thank you again, AIGA, for this opportunity to moderate our conversation on interviewing. I'm really excited to kind of dig in. I think I met with everyone briefly in the last few days, and we could talk for days, I think, on all the different aspects of thinking about interviews, preparing for interviews, and really sort of preparing ourselves for that conversation or experience. To kind of give some context, I think, to the audience, part of what we are hoping to do in our time today is to touch on like 4 different key areas. And if there are questions that folks have in the room, feel free to add them to the Q&A or in the chat, and just if they're kind of related to the topics that we're going to discuss. And we, at the end, will kind of recap, I guess, all that has been said. But throughout, we'll try to integrate in questions from the audience as the panelists are speaking as well. And in terms of the key topic areas, we have highlighted the first topic area is thinking about the basics, right? Just really simply thinking about practicing for interviews, thinking about environment. So our first area of focus will kind of touch on that. Our second topic area will kind of think about as you're preparing for interviews, but in the context of changing areas or focus or discipline, what are the things that we're doing to kind of really prepare ourselves as we move through industry or types of practice. The third topic area that we hope to get to as well is thinking about, now that we're really in this kind of remote era, what does it mean to kind of interview remotely? What are some of the things that are coming up for us in terms of that nature? And the fourth area that we also hit on, which is also always a difficult one, is negotiations. What does that look like? What does that mean for us? How do you negotiate? What are the things that we need to do in that either post-interview? What are the things that we're thinking about there? So those are kind of the key ways that we're hoping to move forward in the discussion. But like I said, again, if there are questions in the audience, feel free to put them in the chat. But to kick us off for area 1, the basics, I think I'll just highlight that I know often when I'm thinking about interviews, I'm wanting to think about the backdrop, I'm wanting to think about the lighting, I want to think about how I'm projecting my voice, and potentially having a mic if that is something that is helpful to amplify in a digital space as well. But to kick us off and kind of, I'm going to pick on each one of our panelists here to maybe speak to what types of advice you might have for practicing around an interview. And I'm going to pass this to David first, if that's okay.
Which David?
Which David?
I forgot. We have 2 Davids. Yes, David Walker.
All right. So I would say basics for prepping. First thing, I would take some time, if it's virtual, to get in front of Zoom, or at least first know what platform you're speaking on, because they aren't all equal. So whether it's Zoom or Teams or Google Voice or Skype, make sure that you know which one you're going to use and how they behave, so that the cues aren't weird if you need to share your screen, or if you're afraid of seeing yourself. Some of them don't let you see yourself while you're presenting, so which is a bit strange, or talking into the void. And then make sure that you get a chance to record yourself prior, so you can recognize some of your cues or tics. So I will pass it to David.
Great, thanks, David. So I think if you were here earlier, there are going to be a lot of common themes and threads throughout everything. And one thing to keep in mind is to be kind to yourself, first of all, and be generous. And it's it's a hard thing not to be critical and to kind of but imagine if someone else, like those introductions were so amazing. Like these are things I would never say about myself necessarily. So see if you can switch it around and be generous to yourself. The other thing to keep in mind is you're designing an experience. And so that's actually helpful to think about because then it's not about you. You actually are thinking about who it is that you're communicating with. So, what are you doing to create the best experience, not to interfere with the ability of the person on the other side to really hear what you're saying and to see what you're presenting? So, that means being prepared, means practicing, as David said, eliminating distractions and and earlier people were talking about typos and all those things. So if you can practice and if you can actually learn to ask for help, right? It's sometimes we feel like I can't ask for help. I feel super self-conscious. I'm kind of embarrassed. But asking for help is a huge thing. So that means asking your friend, like, would you mind watching this recording? Or could you read my resume? Or can you can look at things, just make sure like, how am I coming across? So you're designing experience for someone else so that they can appreciate how amazing you are. And oftentimes, this is what I tell my students is oftentimes your work is much more confident than you are. So you actually need to rise to the level of confidence of your work, right? Don't apologize. Oh, this was this and that. You can give context. You can talk about constraints, but talk about things that you learn because as a student, most of the stuff you're showing is student work. So don't apologize for that. They know it's student work. Explain the context, explain what you learned, and I think those are some basic things.
Thanks, both Davids. I think those are both really, really great sort of things to consider and think about to kind of push us forward even further into sort of the interview itself. I'm going to pass this one to Gabby. In thinking about the things that you might be sharing in your portfolio, what are the ways that you're thinking about how you are articulating about your work? Are there things that you're wanting to include as you explain projects or what your role was in that process? I'm just thinking about like the significance of how we talk about our work in these contexts as well.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. First of all, I think that it's really important to remember that process is probably as important as the final product or the final work. So that is one thing that I'm always telling my students as well. Do not forget that this thing that you're showing is the product of sometimes really, really long processes of research and thinking and group work and all kinds of activities that show other things, many times even soft skills that people wouldn't be able to really see unless you show it, right? So, and that starts by learning how to document process. I think that it's really important to, keep the traditional stuff, right? Like sketchbooks or journals or whatever it is that we feel comfortable using. Right? We now have like Padlet and Notion and all these other tools that really help us simplify the process of archiving. And I think that is really relevant for people to see that kind of process. It is also important to learn how to write the essence of the work in, if possible, one, maybe two short sentences or paragraphs that would allow people to just get a really as complete as it can be, right? A glance of the work. I don't know how many people out there are like me who spends a long time on portfolios, right? And watching and reading, but sometimes if you're in a rush to, hire someone, there is it is likely that people are not really going to have too much time to go through 100 portfolios. So I think that just being concise, learning to being concise and talking about not only one specific piece, of work, but also the kind of things that we care about and that we work on in general. Um, so, and maybe a third element is just making sure that people understand, as you said, right, Mina, how much of the role in the process, or was it Kelly? I think it was Kelly. Sorry. How much of the process of producing that thing that is in the portfolio was completely us, or if it was a group effort. I think that we always need to make sure to recognize the effort of others in our work. I see enormous value to, never forget references, citations, um, even advice that other people have given us in the work that we're presenting, because it really shows that we value that kind of work with others. And I mean, we stand in the shoulders of giants, right? And those that were behind us, helping us learn, um, they deserve the recognition of anything that we do. So that's, I don't see why that wouldn't have a space in portfolios as well.
Yeah, I think it's really important to highlight that. I think the process that you're sort of speaking to, documentation, or articulation of that documentation, or anything that was a part of the collaborative nature to get it there, is really really key. Um, to kind of push us into another few kind of questions, I'm going to group a couple of things together. Um, has it been like in terms of presenting either to an individual versus a group? How are your presentation styles sort of shifting depending on, like, if we're in this kind of context versus just one-on-one? And to kind of add just one other little bit of information there, how do you navigate what you share, right, in that space? Like, what's TMI versus, like, too brief and very kind of closed off? How do you balance sharing the right amount of information about yourself or about the work in either a group or individual context? And I'm going to pass it back to David Walker.
All right, so my suggestion would be to have some narratives already in your back pocket to share. So jot down some stories, jot down some experiences that you had with the work, or experiences that you had with your collaborators that you can share. So if it's with a group, more than likely with that story, you can capture a lot of emotion and a sense of belonging with that group of people if you share a story, versus that back and forth kind of lightning round questions that you might have with an individual. And so with an individual, you more than likely would ask them more questions than the group asking you questions if it's only, just you. And so I would just press to, have fun with it, show as much personality as you can. With a group, of course, you can show as much personality as you can with an individual. I think it's easier with an individual than it is a group. So I will break the chain and go back to Gabby.
I realize that, I fear storms really bad, and all the lightning and oh yeah. So sorry if I'm like what yeah, well, could you tell me the question again, Kelly? I'm sorry, I completely lost it with that lightning.
It's thinking about, like, how we present either to a group or to an individual differently.
Oh yeah. Yeah, well, I think it's really important to do the research, right? As it has been said already. I recently went through the experience of being in a situation where the people in the room was really, I mean, it was a really big group. It was like 15 people, right? And it takes time to learn how to deal with expressions, with gestures, with all those kinds of reactions to the work or to what we say all the time. But I think that if we're able to at least have an idea of the role of each one of those people in the room, to in either the position that you're applying for, or if you're part of even that group evaluating someone else, is really important to know it, even if it is basically. I think that there are many opportunities during the process of interviewing that one could bring up some of those focus or topics of people in the room that could really help you not only show that you care about the place that you are interviewing for, but also that you're able to, you know, have a good conversation or think about how other people are, envisioning your potential role in the space that you're interviewing for. So, yeah, and I think that when it comes to an individual, I mean, that process obviously is much easier, but it also requires a different kind of energy to make sure that that person, that exclusive one person, is going to be getting a good idea of everything that you can bring in, right? So I feel that being able to recognize, if you have weaknesses, I don't really see why not to feel, open to talk to those weaknesses. Everybody has them, but at the same time, just make sure that you're really showing what you're bringing that is unique. And that could even be your own background identity. I mean, there are many other things that go beyond the work. So, yeah.
Great. Thanks, Gabby. I'm gonna go to one of the questions that I see in the chat. I'm gonna pass this to David Asari, and then we'll kind of switch to another subject area here. I see, do you have advice for the why are you leaving your job question? I don't know if anyone's thought about that, but I know that that's definitely something that I've encountered before in terms of like, how do you explain why you're leaving this place or going to somewhere else? And I think, yeah, David, sorry, I don't know if you have any sort of comments there.
Well, so a lot of this goes back to preparation and context. Part of it is your understanding why it is you're actually interested in the job in the first place. And that actually is related to the question of like, why are you leaving your other job? And whether it's about because you're let go, or it's just like, I think the way to frame it is explain to them why you're interested in this particular job with them, and express that interest and show that you've done your homework. So you actually have read the job description and you can explain why you're a good fit. And I would say the way you might talk about leaving in other places, like, this opportunity is so great, I can't pass it up. And I'm learning to grow and develop, especially as a young designer. My sense is these days people don't stick around more than a couple of years at any one place. So the fact that you may be jumping around is not that unusual. Sometimes it might be a detriment if you've been in a place too long, because then you're not maybe growing. So I would, again, focus on like, what is it that you're looking to do? How does this opportunity afford that to you? And so a couple other things related to that are, be clear about the why, right? So that comes back to doing your homework. I would also say, be prepared for questions like this. They're not that they're like gotcha questions, but like that just means if you're able to address them, that means you've thought it through. And that's another soft skill that they would appreciate, especially in a young designers or emerging designers, someone not out of school, like that you, even though you're nervous, and it'd be entirely weird if you're not nervous. It's very human to be nervous, but don't let that get in the way. And don't pretend, and don't like exaggerate, and don't lie. Just be upfront and honest. Now, there are some things that are personal and some things that are professional, and there are rules around things that they can ask you about. So again, doing your homework and understanding, like if they ask you about like things that are inappropriate, you need to be able to respond to that. And I know it's hard to navigate if you're feeling like, well, there's this hierarchy and they're hiring me and I don't want to not answer. But I also, if you are clear and confident, and be able to kind of draw kind of border and edges to the conversation, that also shows them like, oh, this person's not a pushover, they've thought it through. So that goes back to preparation and practice. The other part also is, in terms of context, what kind of interview are you going to be having? Are you talking to a recruiter? Are you talking to someone who's not a designer but like an HR? Is it what kind of interview is it? So that may not even be about design. And if you have to show your work, you have to be able to explain how your design experience is relevant to someone who's not a designer. So that's a real big test. Like if your mom asking you like, what is it that you do again? Like, so if you can explain that to someone who knows nothing about design, then I think you're halfway there, because also it's your ability to communicate.
Exactly. I mean, I think like a big takeaway of what you're saying about like doing the research, not understanding the format, but really kind of being aware of or anticipatory of what you might be asked, right? And I think that sort of segues us to kind of thinking about like for those of us as we are either changing areas of focus or disciplines, what is for all of us, like what are the things that we are sort of thinking about or have encountered, I should say, when we've moved from different design sectors or types of practice. What was difficult, what was challenging, and how are you sort of navigating within there? And I'll pass this one to Gabby.
Yeah, I think that after this pandemic, I know that many people are already considering what's the next step. I mean, what is normal? Is there really a new normal? What does it look like? I think that all those philosophical questions, which by the way, I think that in many ways are a proof of our privilege, right? Being able to have philosophical questions instead of having to survive. But that's another topic for another day. So I think that we're going through those decisions either because we were laid off or because we have the chance to change that kind of path. I think that first of all, it really requires a lot of self-awareness and knowing what it means for us to leave an industry or leave an area and move on to something new, which obviously will require a lot of practice and networking and in many ways do a do-over of all that help us. But I also do think that we need to make sure that as much as we can, we're making decisions that help us being happier or being more content to the kinds of activities that we are with the kinds of activities that we're doing. Because again, if we have that kind of opportunity and privilege, I really don't see, besides the financial aspect of it, I really don't see the reason to be fearful to start something that excites us. It's not going to be easy, of course. We see it with the students all the time, right? And there is a lot of, fear of failing, and there is going to be a lot of that. The problem, I think, is that sometimes we feel that these do-over processes are more appropriate for the younger generation, right? For recent grads or students. But I think that, as long as we have a desire to explore new things, as long as we know that there are possibilities for us to thrive in a new area, um, I think that we need to try it out. If possible, if we can transition to other areas while we are still in a more comfortable situation of work, that is probably the ideal situation to be in. But yeah, I think that it's really important to also recognize the kind of context that we're in. Things are changing very, very rapidly, especially when it comes to technology and new technologies, new ways to do interdisciplinary work. So it's normal to wanting to move to another area. It just requires work, like everything else.
And we'll get one more on this with David Walker. Any thoughts to that?
Yeah, I mean, this is an awesome question. Like, I'm kind of in the middle of this myself. But I'm an eternal optimist, right? Like I feel like momentum matters. If you're going down the path, if they're offering you an interview and you're able to speak passionately about it, then that's 50% in the direction that you want to go in. And so as long as you're showing that excitement, showing that passion, showing that penchant for knowledge, showing that penchant for the challenge, then the opportunity is always going to be there for you to take it. You know, whether it's this job and you get it, or if it's another job that you're also going for. So I think it's really important. The I guess one of the features of design is that we constantly have things that are challenging us, whether it's our thought processes and theories, or the projects that we are being put, you know, that we're being asked to produce solutions for. So the fact of continual change, like that's something that's deeply embedded in us all, that should allow us to move into that next place without, you know, too much anxiety. Of course, there's fear, like, oh, I'm not the greatest this or that. But the fact that we're stepping out, like attempting it, is the first step, which should allow us to make that leap.
I might add, I think that to that end, I think the idea that you're describing of like the ball rolling, I can't agree more. I feel like sometimes we're presented opportunities and we didn't expect them, and so there's the opportunity that we reach out for, and then there's the opportunities that come to us. And I think there's like a balance of like sometimes in our lifetime various versions of that. And I think when things come, I know from my own experience that you don't feel ready. And I think that it's definitely, you know, something to continue to contend with. But I think if you're scared, there's something to be said about, I think someone had told me, it's like, then there's a potential for growth in that kind of anxiety and being fearful of like what could happen in that new role. So I think that's definitely a really important sort of aspect of this, especially in changing focus, changing jobs, changing disciplines. But I guess another question that I have sort of connected to this and that supports the process of changing jobs is the piece around networking. And that's come up in a couple of different moments, I think, in this conversation so far. But like, what is the importance of networking, and what exactly, in your view, does networking actually mean in this time? How can that sort of like take shape? And I'm going to pass this to David Asari.
I think the previous session with Diana and Heba was like perfectly encapsulated all of that. But I think for students, this is how I talk to my students about this, because when you say networking, they're like, it sounds like, ugh. And I tell them, look, networking just means you've connected with another human being. And that's an amazing opportunity, right? Like, and I tell them, like, first of all, having a conversation and a dialogue and a relationship with your teachers, that's just networking. And when I tell them, like, you're going to fill out, like, write your resume, and then you're going to say, like, well, who are my references? Like, who is it going to be? It's going to be your teachers. So that's why I tell them, like, maybe it's important for you to show up on time and to do your work. And it's like, we're not art directors or, and designers in this situation, but we can speak to your personal sense of responsibility, how hard you try. We can speak to your ability to research and process. So networking just means you're connecting with other people, and be clear about why you're trying to connect with them. Again, previous session with Diana Heba was like fantastic. Like being kind of clear about it. You're not just trying to be like opportunistic. Oh, I'm gonna like go after this person, like slightly stalkery. But the idea is that what is it that you can offer them, as well as that you can learn from them. And so that's why the idea of networking in terms of mentorship, right? Again, previous session. What do you have to offer to other people? Like I feel super fortunate as a teacher. Like I get to work with all these amazing students, and as a student, keeping in mind when I was a student, like I really struggled at a certain point. And what saved me was having an amazing teacher who then became my mentor, who later became my friend, and then ultimately was a colleague in terms of being faculty. So seeking out those opportunities and not being afraid to ask is also important. Like something's like, oh, I'm just a student or I'm just starting out. It's like, my point is like, why not you? And if you don't ask, you don't know. And either people are going to say yes or they're going to say no, right? So I think that's really an important part of networking is, again, not to undervalue yourself like, oh, I'm just so and so. It's like, no. So going up and talking to someone at a conference and then introducing yourself and actually being prepared to ask intelligent questions or to speak about their work, like that's part of networking. And
Yeah. Oh, I was going to say really quickly, like I was just reminded of an anecdote, and I think David Walker will also laugh at this, but I met David at the 2018 AIGA Design Conference in Pasadena. And I think just in terms of anecdotes and thinking about networking and thinking about like what you're saying, David Asari, like I was reminded of like just I think it was at the Design Educators symposium that we had, and I think it was at the end of a session, and we ended up just talking for like a few minutes, and like I think did you give me a business card? I don't know if you gave me your I think you gave me a business card or
Yeah, I
something.
think I gave you a business card.
Think you had a physical business card, which is also why business cards are helpful too, because like your information, if we were in person or that was a thing, like you could give that card as an a way to kind of connect with someone. But I was thinking about how like 2 years later, like I ended up connecting with David again and have collaborated with him on various events and things, and I think that there's truly like you might meet someone one time and you never know when you might connect with them or something comes up that you are working with them in some capacity. And so I don't know, I'm just really sort of like reminded of that in this moment. Gabby, was it your hand?
Yeah, no, it makes me think about another thing that is super, super important, which is, you know, that is also the people who may be giving you a job in the future, right? And the people who are going to be in committees, and it happens all the time. This industry, or at least this space that we're in, is a rather small space, and you end up at least meeting momentarily someone at some point. So, nice to meet you, Diane. I never met you before, but here we are, right? So not burning bridges is, oh my God, so important to remember. I have a friend who always thought that whenever you would leave a job, that would mean that the relation with people in that place was not going to continue being good if it was. I think the opposite. I think that we all transition, we all move to places, we want to grow, and if people really care about you, they will see the need to move forward, right? So no, I think that, yeah, just keeping an eye on what everybody is doing and making sure that we show interest, because you never know, right? You may end up making a book together, yeah, right, Kelly?
Yes.
So
it happened. Thanks, man. Yeah, I mean, go ahead, David.
I was just going to add to that is, in general, a good rule of thumb is to treat other people with respect and generosity. Like when I worked at that studio, like sometimes I would be downstairs and I would answer the phone because the receptionist had to step away or someone's walking to the door. They don't know that I'm a designer there. They just see some guy at the desk. So, and also I would see how people would treat Charlene, who would be at the desk, and I'd be upstairs looking down. Like if they treated her badly, like, and they came up and sucked up to me later, like, oh no, forget that. So, and also you don't know where people are in terms of their own journey, like whether they're on their way up or the way down, or where you are in that. So as was mentioned, it's such a small world that you cannot not know everyone else at a certain point, like 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 degrees of separation. So putting yourself out there, being visible, being very active, like today, like these are amazing people that I have had the fortune to connect with for a long time, or today or inadvertently a few years ago. So these are all opportunities to connect.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I guess I'll add to this, and I share this with my students. So I typically give them like a top three, right? If you go to a conference or if you meet somebody digitally, these are the things that you do. So first thing is the connection, right? So connect, talk to them, remember what they say, or remember what they're wearing, or remember something interesting about them, and also share something interesting about you. The second thing is the follow up. So in that follow up, you remind them how they know you. You remind them what you remember about them. So now they feel actually connected. And the third thing after the follow up is give them the ask, or ask them what it is you want, or tell them what it is you want to help them with, or whatever you want to interface on, so that then you actually feel like a friend. At this point, you've had three connections, right? Not a single connection and you feel like it's an instant thing, but three that that person can also have memories built just like you built. You've not taken a trip around the world, you've not had tons of drinks at a bar, but you've only interfaced three times, and it hasn't been this really heavy lift.
I
And
think. Oh, go ahead. I was
one more
gonna. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, David.
one more thing is, if you're a student, you got to leverage that. People like to help students. Once you graduate, it's a kind of a different story. But if you're a student and you are informed and engaged and active, people want to help you. So take advantage of that while you can, because once you're out the door, you're competing with thousands of other human beings to kind of connect with them. But if you're a student and you're asking, then again, I feel like people are super generous. The flip side of that is for the interview process or in general, sometimes people are jerks. And
Well,
so the challenge is not to take that personally. And it's hard not to, because it's about your work and it's like, oh, you identify with it. And that goes back to persistence. Like you go for an interview or you apply to all these places and you don't get in, and then your friends are having like, oh you're comparing yourself all the time to your friends. Like, look, they're working these amazing jobs. But if you're clear that you want to work in design or do a certain kind of work, and if you're clear about that goal, you just have to be persistent. And as my friend Doug said, uh, like if you try 99 times and you fail or get rejected, if you don't try that 100th time, then you don't know. Like that could have been it. But it's really hard. But you're doing this for yourself, right? So
yeah, I mean, I think to that point, David, I think what you're hitting on, like people being jerks, I think is a real thing. And I wanted to kind of segue a little bit into the next question. And this is kind of a little bit about kind of the interview process remotely, but also more specifically, kind of in any kind of interview, the types of questions that we might be asked that might be prying or uncomfortable in some way. I'm just curious for all of you, what are the sort of most surprising questions you've been asked in an interview, or that you've heard someone else been asked? And how do you navigate sort of those questions if they're ones that you didn't know how to respond to, or ones where you're like, I have like a really uncomfortable feeling about this? How do you tactfully sort of respond? But also, again, what are the questions that have come up for folks?
I don't think I've had any one particular one that's just been out of bounds per se. But I think the difficult one folks ask is, what's been a failure on your job, right? Like, and you have to figure out some way to explain this without having this nebulous meltdown and bear too much. So, yeah, I mean, of course, like I think whatever the difficult question is, it should be personal, and you can turn it into a funny story if there is a funny ending, so that it keeps it light. But aside from that, I don't really have a strange one.
Gabby?
Well, once I went to interview to a place 2 hours away from where I was living. I went for a first round, I went for a second round. And during the second round, I was asked something very, very technical that was not part of the description of the job, or something that I would expect. So obviously I ended up blanking. I was like, it was not something that I was really either expecting or part of the application or the posting of the job. Obviously I didn't get it, clearly, but I felt that was like a really badly intentioned question to some degree, because I was not only very young, but also just really, I had things that I knew at that point and others that I probably would just heard about him and not really being an expert. So that was bad. Another thing that I've seen that happens a lot, obviously, is the family questions, right? One time I was in a search committee in a university, and the best candidate for a position to which more than 100 people applied to, it was during those discussions, right, with other faculty about this person, and one of the people, without any bad intentions or trying to be just overly concerned, I think he was referring to the fact that this person had kids. They said something like, oh yeah, and this person also needs the job because he has 2 kids and blah blah blah. And as much as we understand the difficulties of many personal situations, many of them cannot really be referred to, even if we know that, that there is a lot to be said about maternity and, paternity and all that in the workplace. But yeah, I think that there are smarter ways to refer to those elements, but it's really, and there is a big difference between the public and the private sectors, right? The public usually really have very strict rules of hiring that, God, they need to be followed. But in the private sector, it's just, you never know.
David,
I might, oh, sorry.
go ahead. No, go ahead, David.
I was just going to say, it's, if you're put in the position to be made uncomfortable by a question, you might flip it around and just say, that's a really interesting question. I'm curious why you're asking, and put it back on them if you feel comfortable doing that. Because part of it is that you're showing like, oh, rather than being reactive and put on the spot and they're seeing you, like, it's more about you're trying to be more responsive rather than being reactive. So you're trying to process and take it in, but then you're engaging them in a conversation like, oh, I'm really curious, like, why did you ask that? Or like, is that related to the position or the skills that you're looking for? So I'd say that's a thing to think about. Yeah, go ahead, David.
I didn't have any weird questions.
I think Kelly was going to ask you something there.
Yeah, no, I think weird questions. I think just to kind of end on what David Asari is saying, the asking a question back to the question, I think, is a really critical way to kind of highlight whether the person's bias is like really apparent. And if they can't answer, I think it's a way to be kind of tactful, but also like put it back on them. So I definitely agree with you on that. And then I think another sort of kind of last area here is just thinking about negotiating, right? So I think part of our sort of experience, I imagine, in the interview is like, there's questions perhaps related to the job. There's questions that you are sort of asked about, what you know or what have you. And then at the end, right, you might know what the salary might be, or there might be an email or some kind of correspondence that indicates what the compensation might be. And I'm curious in terms of like inside the interview and then post interview, how you navigate the negotiation process, and what are the things that you are sort of navigating, both like I said, inside the interview, if there's an opportunity to ask questions about that, or on the other side, post interview, what do you typically sort of do on that end? And maybe David Walker, I think we can start with.
All right. I think a common rule of thumb for me is always to ask for more. Like even if the number is like astronomically higher than what you're making, still ask for more. Just to see what the options are. I mean, if they come back with 1 cent more, that's more than you would have accepted if you didn't negotiate. Additionally, try and figure out what the benefits are. How the benefits in office, whether it's pay or social benefits, right? Like what does it look like to be an employee? What does it look like to work within these teams? Like really to dig in, and this is the point of really interviewing them to figure out if this is the place that you really want to be. I'll go to Gabby.
I think this really is one of those questions dependent on gender, because we women are always underselling ourselves. And I mean, this is obviously a topic for another time again, but it's very real. It's very real. We fear to be rejected. We fear to be, lesser than. We fear many, many things because, we're so sadly programmed that, men are always going to be getting the job. Men are always better, especially if, we are caring for others. So I think that everything that could be said here is important, but I also think that there is a huge factor that has to do not only with gender, but also with our socioeconomic background, right? What are we used to? Not having mentors or role models that would help us understand those processes, right? People like us who would know, this is how you need to negotiate. This is the language that you need to use. This is, those kinds of things that are so, so basic. But, women of color, for example, there is a big gap in that kind of knowledge. So, mhm.
I was just going to add to that, Gabby, that there's women of color, obviously, sometimes, like within the spectrum, right, comparatively are, making less. But then something else that I also kind of want to add back to that public-private sector piece and to the gender piece is that even at the same, if let's say you're in academia, the same institution, the same job, like you might be getting significantly less for teaching the same, like, discipline or subject area. So I think that the challenge with that is sometimes it's visible at the public institutions. You can see the salary bands and that there are typically like ranges of things. But it is really, man, that's like Gabby said, a whole panel for another time that we should talk about this. But I do think that for I think young designers that are kind of in this process thinking about, negotiation, and all of the things that are being said about, asking former professors, asking senior designers that work at different places, I think that we have to be in conversation, in dialogue with folks to be able to understand what we don't know. And I know that in many of the positions that I've kind of navigated into, I've had to ask, like, is this seem right? Is this normal? And I think like being okay, thinking that you can ask, is this normal, is okay. But I think that there's this other clouded sense of mystery, like you don't ask, like we're not supposed to ask, we're supposed to just take what we get. I think that pushing against that is really, I think we have to make sure that we don't do that, because then we accept positions where we are lower, paid less than we are worth. And I think the other thing that I think that was sort of, I think David Walker, you mentioned this, the different types of benefits, right? That like benefits are not just the money. And it's like, is it the insurance? Is it the the gym membership? Is the gym membership what you need, or is it actually like, $5,000 extra, right? So I find that like asking those questions of like, what is it? What are the specific details? Are, I think, helpful for making smart decisions. And I guess one kind of last question, because I know we're almost at time here, is just thinking about well, this is a tricky one, but for those that have student loans, right, and are navigating having already acquired debt, right, when you're navigating looking at a position, there are like a series of factors that have to be kind of like considered, I think, when taking and accepting a position. And I'm just curious, like, too, like from the sort of all of the things that we need to survive, how are you sort of looking, not just loans, but everything else, like family, everything, like how do you navigate like doing the math? Like what are some simple ways that you're kind of looking at what you might be compensated as and what you might need to kind of live? But like, are there certain things, ways that you approach this, so you're not like, oh, I'm just gonna go get this job without being informed? Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I guess prior to answering this question, never really jump into giving them a yes. Like always ask for time so you can review it, chew over it with yourself, talk about it with your friends and family, your former or past colleagues or design professors or your mentors, so that they can give you a good, accurate depiction from an outside source of if you feel like this is worth it. I mean, of course, like I'm in Tennessee. If I ask Kelly in New York or David in California what contract designer rates would be, our numbers would be way off. But if I'm relocating to their area, then I would be able to get some parity, or at least know if I'm in the ballpark. So if I'm looking to relocate my family and I'm looking to and I'm thinking about my student loans, it's almost like pricing your work. You want to figure out, all right, what is it going to cost me in my light bill, my telephone bill, my student loan, what gas am I spending, how much does internet and Netflix cost, roll that all into a ball, and this is the base that I need to make. And then anything over that, you have to factor in like your savings and what you want to invest. And next thing you know, you're like at this number. And so from that, you're able to come up with what you feel like you should make, and if it makes sense to actually take the job based on the salary that they're recommending to you.
David Asari and Gabby and
So I had a student a few years ago, this is several years ago, where she was working for a small boutique kind of studio that had a good reputation and they're doing like really lovely work. But then she's being recruited by a tech company. And, people are saying, oh no, don't work for those people. They're evil, blah, blah, blah. I'm thinking, oh no, you have student debt. You have to take that other job because you need to stabilize your finances and that will allow you to move forward with your life. But if you have this huge debt hanging over your head, but you're doing really lovely little work, that's not going to help you. You need it, but if you're clear about why you're making the choices you're making, if it's about your debt, then set it like I'm going to do this for X amount of time, so I can kind of like get a handle on it, and then I'm going to plan to do something else. So being clear about, again, your ultimate goals, whether it's about financial stability or like not having huge student loans, or maybe being able to afford in a little different part of the country, or like maybe you want to travel, so you want to put some money away for that. So being clear about ultimately what you want to get out of the situation. And the other part is whatever job you take, you're not stuck. I mean, maybe your debt is kind of making you feel like you're stuck. But if your company could turn around and let you go in a minute, they're not going to worry about that. Where you're like, oh, should I leave? Like, so all these people are my friends, and it's like, yeah, they have no qualms about, or like, I'm going to take this other job, but I don't know. Like, you need to do what you need to do for yourself. Don't be like a mercenary, but be clear, like, you're doing this for you, and not for your parents, not for your friends, not for status and all this other stuff. Like, what are you getting out of it?
Thank you, David. I know we're at time, so I want to say thank you to the panelists for your insights and everyone listening in.
Thank you all so much. This was phenomenal. And I really can't wait to see you all again in some human form because I've enjoyed networking with you all over the years. And by that, I mean getting lunch and drinks. No, but thank you so, so much. Our last session of the day, but not the least, is Getting Hired, Strategies to Take You Beyond the Portfolio. And we have Alberto Rigau, who currently serves as the principal at eStudio Interlinea and as a lecturer at NC State University's College of Design. And I'm happy to say he will also be lecturing at Virginia Tech this coming fall, so I'm squeaking things in for him as well. He is also, most excitedly, going to be taking my position as co-chair of the AIGA Design Educators community when I roll off at the end of the month. And I must say, I couldn't be leaving it in better hands. I'm so excited for that. But that's not what this is about. And Mina will introduce Elisa.
Thank you for that, Megan. All right, Elisa Pacheco Rivera is a buzzing mother of two, meditation practitioner, newbie, and minimalist enthusiast who happens to be an experienced HR professional with strong passion about learning and organizational development. And Alberto and Elisa, I will kick it over to you.
Okay, thank you so much for having us. Okay, so we would like to warm up the group a little bit, and we would like to see if our attendees could please write on the chat where you're from, because a little bit of what we're going to be talking about may change depending on context, to just a sense of where you are. Okay. Okay, nice. So US primarily. Okay, fantastic. So, we have the awful duty of being the closing session of the day, but I want to give you a context how we got here. Just like everybody else here today, I'm a graphic designer, trained like that. All my life, I have freelance, ran a studio, I've hired, and the only interviews I know are design interviews. Then, a few years ago, due to my consulting strategy business, I had an opportunity to work with a local media company. And we had to hire interns for the first time that were going to be design interns. And I got paired up with the HR department. And for the first time, I saw how HR interviewed. And I got to tell you, I was shocked because, I grew up with the portfolio being this lovely jewel of you make it awesome. We heard this morning a lot about that. Then the HR person is just like hammering them on, what is your life goal? What are you thinking about? What did you do wrong? And, when that meeting ended, I asked the HR rep and I said, dude, what the fuck? I mean, you didn't even look at the portfolio. And the guy said, I never look at them on the first time around because if their personality does not warrant them sitting here with us, I don't want to see anything else. Now, not every HR rep is that way, and Elisa is not that HR rep, but Elisa was part of that team. And I thought that it would be amazing for us to have a person from the HR world come to us and talk with us here today. So without further ado, we're going to start here a little bit of a little presentation going. And so first of all, I want to leave you with Elisa to tell you a little bit of what she is all about and her philosophy about how she thinks about hiring in HR.
Yes, well, thank you for that introduction, Alberto. I've been working in HR for 17 years now, and definitely my philosophy goes towards development, and that development starts with students. So I started working in the IT industry as a student as well, and then I remained there for 10 years. So it was a very successful story of how a student can really be a long term in a good organization if they gave themselves the chance to try. So I love HR, I love development, and I've been working with students all my life. So this is like phenomenal to me to be part of this session with Alberto.
Thank you, Elisa. For those of you in the audience, I am the most probably like cliched graphic designer. I studied graphic design because I come from a family of artists. I decided I don't want to work anywhere. I can do this myself. And so 3 days after my undergrad, I started freelancing. And I've never actually worked. I don't even know what a W-2 looks like except when I freelance for colleges, because all my life I have worked for myself and made a space for myself. But that said, Elisa and I do have something in common. And when we started talking about what we were wanting to talk about, we started talking about what is our story? And in case of you attendees, what is your story?
Yes. The first thing that I would like, to address with all of you is that in your job search, you need to have a storyline. That really makes a difference, because in this story, you can communicate me as an HR. What is your vision? How are you positioning yourself? How are you selling your added value? And how do you really are different from other candidates? That's the key message that I will like to receive from any candidate during the interview. And the most important thing is to be deliberate about defining how are you going to make yourself memorable to me and to the hiring manager and all the interviewers in the process. And this is not an accident, and you can't leave it to happen as it flows. Because if you are not intentional about how you are going to make your interview process, then maybe you are not that successful at all. And when I say that you have to position yourself, I'm talking about, are you going to tell me that you are a key player, you are a collaborator, are you a creative person, a strong designer? What are you giving to me? What are your talents that you are putting in the table for us in the organization? And if you have this clear, I assure you that you are going to be very, very effective in the design of your resume and your portfolio, and of course, during the interview process. So don't be afraid to be who you are, but to also tell your story and highlight your key message. Alberto.
Fantastic. Okay, so how do we make ourselves memorable? There are certain ways to do that. You can always, kind of do an embarrassing kind of gesture. You can fall off the chair and people will remember you for that. But hopefully what we're trying to get at today is that we want to make sure that you guys understand that your resume, your portfolio, and your interview process never live on their own. They are part of a larger representation strategy. And yes, you have to have a killer portfolio, you have to have a killer resume, and you have to have a killer interview. But that doesn't mean that on their own, they have to necessarily be everything of their own, because they serve different purposes. And I think that that's really important, and we start thinking about this. The purpose of the portfolio is never the same purpose of the resume. The resume is there to open the door. But you're in the design world, we're not going to cross the door only with the resume. We will need the portfolio and we will need the interview to have a sort of a conversation. And then the same way, so we got the door open, then the portfolio needs to be there. And it's been interesting to me that all day we've been talking about portfolio, but nobody has qualified what does a portfolio mean and the different kinds of portfolio. Having a portfolio website out in the web is not the same as having a portfolio to get you a job at a particular studio. We'll get to that in a few minutes. So now what we are going to be doing is we're going to be going through these a little bit and talking as a kind of pairing system as to how HR and design kind of correlate in these areas. So first of all, I'm going to let you with Elisa to talk about the resume.
Yes. For me, the design is a very powerful way to communicate your message and your story. But the one thing that will open you the door for that interview is your resume. And it's not only the design of the resume, it's the content of the resume. So for us, as candidates, this could really make or break the opportunity. There are resumes I only like scan them and I know this one no, oh yes, this one yes. But what really catches my eyes sometimes is that I feel that the resume is kind of tailored for this opportunity. And something that I recommend to all students over there is to really navigate and study the job ad. Really study the About Us section of that organization. In the About Us, you will see the culture, the values, what they really are looking for in their employees. And in the job ad, you will catch some buzzwords that you can use in your resume. So the resume is not one size fits all. Try to really tailor it for each opportunity and take advantage of the job ad. It will really give you some keywords that you can use. Second, include soft skills to really enrich your profile. For me, the education or even the experience will tell me what you are capable of doing. And that is very important. But your soft skills are going to tell me how are you going to perform. Are you a collaborator? Are you an individual contributor? Are you organized and structured? Or are you more of a free spirit? What I will expect from you as a coworker here is gotta be somehow in the resume, in the skills part. Third, keep it simple, be clear and realistic. Don't use all that hyperbolic language that, it will not make the, the resume realistic. Sometimes less is more. And when there is too much buzzword, there is a lot of content, but doesn't say that much. So keep that balance to make it, really practical and easy to read. And third, showcase your accomplishments. Sometimes the resumes are like a job description. Have you noticed that they are a list of all the responsibilities, all the tasks? But what I am looking for are your accomplishments. How you really perform doing X or Y. For example, instead of saying, I was in charge of the design of all the product campaigns. Well, nice to know that you were in charge, but how that go? Well, you can, instead of saying that, you can put on your resume that you designed the new product branding and campaign in close collaboration with, marketing, sales, and you achieved an increase in the sales by 20% versus target. That is much more powerful than just a list of, tasks or responsibilities. Now let's hear from Alberto, his recommendations in regards to the design of and format of the resume.
I think that something that designers need to think about is that a resume, and we said it today, right? So we need various formats of resumes, but to me, we actually need different resumes depending on where we are applying. Mm-hmm. And I'll give you an example. Me as a freelancer, I go up for jobs against big corporate firms, but I go up for jobs against smaller niche design studios. The bigger corporate firms, a proposal there could be all text, logo in the corner, that's out the door. But if I know I'm competing with smaller studios that are going to design those proposals and make them all beautiful, I need to dedicate time to that proposal so that I can compete adequately. And I think the resume is exactly the same. I'm going to say this to everybody. I mean, I always think that the resume needs to be a piece in your portfolio. And if it were the opening page in your portfolio, you'd be proud to share with that. Because sometimes I see the typography, and by the way, I'm a big type nerd. It'll be a pattern here today. But I see the typography and I'm like, you didn't give this 3-second thought. But then in your portfolio, I eventually see amazing typography in layout and publication. So I'm like, so how important was this resume to get my attention? And I am going to mimic Longo's comment this morning. You know, those graphs about software, those graphs about I am an expert at this or that, to me, you know, that's really not necessary as long as it feels genuine. I prefer a very minimalistic, simple, to the point resume that speaks a personality versus seeing a resume that feels bossy, just like Elisa was saying, if the buzzwords are there. So if the buzz design terms are there, I don't see you thinking, I see you reacting. And for me, a resume and a portfolio in an interview needs to show me that you're thinking. Readability and legibility, you would think that this feedback doesn't need to be said, but sometimes I see a resume, I can't even associate a column of dates with a column of when it happened and why. So make sure that those work. Contrast, and I don't mean this in color, I actually mean this in content. You know, how to highlight what's important. Sometimes I see these resumes where the word education is 78-point type, but then the name of the university or the degree is 12-point type. There's a problem there in contrast because I'm really, you know, I think it should be the opposite. Education can be really small and I want to see what you're up to, what you've done, etc. Now, in terms of layout, you need to make this updatable. And I don't know if I made up that word translated into English, but I think you all get the idea, is that design it in pieces so that when you do have to make a change, you can easily adapt it for a print studio or a UX studio. I don't know how you would be applying for the both of them. So one after the other, but it's a possibility. And I think that it's important to think about that if you highly customize that design in tons of boxes, like Megan is writing in the chat, updating is going to be complicated. And then finally, you know, have the different formats. And I threw a little trick this morning that I figured out a few years ago. When you're in InDesign and you export into a rich text format, that'll show you the order that the actual PDF is reading the content on your document. So if you export it and everything is off in a mess, then there's really no way that the system, if it's a larger corporation, is reading this correctly. So again, I less urge you to focus on a style or a look. I think that those could come from your own genuine development as a thinking designer, but definitely I encourage you to think on the ideas of legibility and readability so that we can engage with your content very quickly and in the end figure out, I do want to speak to this person. Now, as we go forward, I want to talk a little bit of the portfolio. And this morning and this afternoon, we got a lot of details. So I'm going to go through this a little bit quick. But I want to focus today on a portfolio that will get you to the interview and that you can use in the interview. In my head, a portfolio that needs to be on the web. It should be flashy. It should be attractive. It should make me want to spend more than 7 seconds on your page. But a portfolio for an interview, I've always thought that it has to be a different device because the problem is that you don't want somebody to just think cool. You want somebody to look at your work and ask why and how. And I think that, first of all, a portfolio's job to get into an interview or to use in an interview needs to spark conversation. The portfolio cannot live there and die in the table and you're just there kind of sitting in front of the interviewer because you need to engage in the conversation. And Elisa will tell you now, if you don't speak about your work and if you don't engage with the interviewer, it's like if you're not there, even if you have the most amazing portfolio. Mm-hmm. And think about it in terms of layout. It's not the same to lay out the most beautiful images, but then to lay out progress, to lay out, I think one of the most beautiful portfolios that I ever saw only had 3 projects, but then they showed me a lot of tries that never actually worked. And he spent time explaining why they hadn't worked. And then when he showed me the final one, I was like, who cares about what it looks? You just proved that you're thinking about this correctly. And that's important as I move through, because you need to highlight the work you want to do. And you've heard this as a repeated action, repeated comment all the day. And you're going to assume that because you put a lot of publications on there, we're going to think that you really want to do that work. But I'll tell you, as somebody who has been looking at portfolios for 12 years, I know when somebody is showing me work that they're excited about, and I show when they're showing me work just because they have to. And, you know, and even, Elisa, have you seen that even when you're interviewing?
Yes, I'm having flashbacks of interviews for graphic designers in the media company that we collaborate a few years ago, of a candidate that was showing me this portfolio, and the position that we had was in the newspaper doing, you know, ads for the print version, and he was showing me all the work in web, and I was like, you know, but what we have currently is for the newspaper, the print version, and you're showing me all these wonderful jobs that you have done in web. Are you really looking forward for an opportunity in this other line? And he was like, yeah, why not? But I'm sure he doesn't want it, that opportunity.
No, and I'll give you the flip side to this. Maybe you come back to me, and I'm somebody that will accept this, and you'd be like, I don't want to focus on a kind of job. I want to design everything around me. And trust me, I hear you. I consider myself a generalist, even in 2021, when everybody thinks that we should be specialties. I believe that everything needs to be designed, but you have to come ready to the interview to talk about this. Because if I put an ad out that I need a print designer, and you come back and 70% has to be digital, sorry, not has to be, but 70% of what you show is digital, you have to come ready to talk about design principles. Like David was saying earlier, I mean, it's all about be a nice guy and walk me through your answer. You know, don't just say the answer there, oh no, yeah, but you know, whatever. You know, if you qualify it, maybe it's not the answer that we were looking for, but Elisa and I would be like, wow, you know, great explanation. Let's keep on going and let's continue with it. Which, by the way, gets me to edit. And my major in design comes from a communication newspaper school where editing was something big that was taught. But it's always better to have 3 or 4 projects that are narratively on point, not necessarily the best design projects, but they can help you as you consider the rhythm of your presentation, than to have 20, but that they make no sense together. And, you know, that's more of a subjective opinion. I know that other people like to see kind of scopes of work, but for me, the narrative and make sure that it's woven is really important in having a conversation. And rhythm, I wanted to bring this up because rhythm, to me, is really important in terms of how I see portfolios now. A lot of people are adding these title pages, you know, branding work, and then it takes a full page just to say that. And then you end up with a 40-page portfolio where 12 pages are title pages. Think about how you use a portfolio to have a conversation, because those, for me, slow down the conversation. I think that, you know, that can be a folio detail. You know, if you're a layout nerd, you'll know that the folios are always key, how the page numbers are there. Well, think about that, how that portfolio can have those elements as if it were a book layout, so that it helps with the reading of it as you're having a conversation. And now a few quick tips, you know, always write to add, not to describe. And again, don't forget, this is a portfolio for the interview. I don't want to see written what I am seeing. I don't want to see, oh, logo design for a tractor company, and then I see a logo that's called Tractors Are Us. I mean, I get it. So, and I think this goes back to Elisa's point on, you know, how do you qualify what you did for the company? We don't want the description. We don't want that. What we want to see is what your take is on it. And maybe the project is not the most beautiful, but if you say, this was an opportunity to explore contrast in both color and typographic form, oh, wow, I'm going to be looking at your piece at a different level and understanding what that means. I already spoke about process, but you know, to me, process has more than final word. Credit collaborators, and I have a cool anecdote here for you. I have had people call me because people who left the studio showed up work in portfolios and they showed exactly the same thing without an explanation of what their role had been. But they know who I am, so they picked up the phone and said, hey, I have this and this, and suddenly I have two portfolios together. What did each of them do? And in the previous panel, Gabby spoke about this. Crediting is highly crucial because the discipline is this small. And trust me or not, eventually now with the web, everything we're going to see online, we're going to connect online, and employers are going to see each other. Elisa, do you have a story like that, where you spoke with other companies, or how you do it, maybe not in design, but with general hiring?
Well, in design, it happens to me once, but they did credited, the collaborator, but it was kind of weird. I noticed the candidate was like awkward, and for me, it wasn't clear what he really did towards that design versus the other person. So for me, it was confusing the way he presented me that design.
Yeah, and I'll tell all of you, crediting somebody else does not make you less in the eyes of a recruiter, because we all know now projects happen collaboratively. And I think Megan wrote in the chat that earlier today. I mean, collaboration will happen all the time, and soft skills are going to be essential for that, because we're not hiring necessarily the best designers. We're hiring the people that can work in teams.
Yes, and for me in HR, I'm really looking at the person and the professional, the technical knowledge, and if the design is correct or no. That's something that you as experts do in the interview process. But I'm looking at the candidate as a person, and we are looking like two sides of a coin in the interview process: the hiring manager and HR, and that's something important too.
Yeah, and and again, think about HR being an opinion, your direct supervisors can have an opinion, and all of them come from different worlds. But think about Elisa, who probably interviews 10, 20 people a week. These are people that are constantly seeing, so that if you credit or put somebody's name, they might start making connections, because then they interview somebody else, or they see somebody else who works at a different job. And then a final kind of comment here, I encourage all of you to visualize your work through mockups, but I'm going to point out now that you have to do this carefully, because there's an overload explosion of mockups in the market, and now every portfolio, I'm going to say this more conservatively, is starting to look the same in certain ways. So I encourage all of you to find more authentic ways to do this. Yes, Mina, Adobe Dimension, you've got to learn that. And I just finished a course on branding this semester, where one of the students said that if something she learned this semester that she would take on to her career was Dimension, because it allowed her to show work in ways that nobody else was doing. And I encourage all of you, because you may be going to Graphic Burger, downloading a beautiful mockup, and you think your portfolio looks awesome, but you're forgetting that I'm looking at 30 of them a month, and I'm seeing the same mockup come up and up and up. So I think that we need to find ways that speak to our own creative processes. And by the way, if any of you, you're saying, well, this guy is saying that, and he has a very kind of plain kind of website. The way that I tend to work is not about a general communication out to the world, but when a client comes and says, oh, we want to work with you, I always have one quick question session, and then I send them sample of work, because I have to be sure that I can respond adequately to their need and our needs as creators. And so anyway, this leads us to the final point here, which is design the portfolio. You think that I wouldn't have to say this, but I have had so many experience of, like Mitch Goldstein mentioned this morning, or long ago, but they mentioned about the zip file with the 100 whatever JPEG. And I want to merge two examples here into a story. Once I had a student who came in for. Oh, sorry. Oh, there was somebody in the background.
I mean, I tried not to talk as much, but I guess I'm not sure it's
Hey, David Walker, mute yourself.
Oh, there we go. Okay. I had a story once of a student who came with a portfolio that was sideways on the screen on the PDF. And when we literally said, can you rotate the portfolio? She rotated the laptop to show it to us. And the interviewer next to me was like, okay. And he basically said nothing, and we went with it and we gave them the portfolio. But think about what that says. A, of how you design the portfolio. It was vertical on a horizontal screen, so we were seeing black, more black than your own work. But then when we asked about that, the way that the reaction was makes us doubt that then your resume said that you were an expert in Adobe Illustrator and Acrobat. So think about what all these narratives come together. And in that case, I want to turn it over to Elisa to talk a little bit about the interview process. And it's important to understand that Elisa's view comes from HR, and we're going to be facing that for the rest of your career. So if you have questions for her now, send them over and let's use the advantage, because we have access to somebody who really knows this stuff.
Yes, thank you, Alberto. When now we have a killer resume, a perfect portfolio, we have the door open for an interview, and we really have to be clear of what to expect of the process. And the first step is the phone screening. Typically, this is a 10, 15 minutes call. And what we are looking in this call is to make sure you have the basic requirements for the position. So those are very targeted questions. But what I am really looking in that phone screenings is the energy, the projection, what kind of vibe do I receive from that call? And then you may have 2 or 3 interviews depending on the organization. This process can include hiring managers, peers, potential internal customers that will be working with you in the organization. And what I am looking in this part of the process is to meet you as a person. How do you manage work? How do you approach situations? How do you approach conflict? How do you approach feedback when somebody tells you that design doesn't work, it's not what I have in mind? Well, how do you, are flexible and ask questions to understand then what the other person has in mind? So I try to pick their brain to understand how they approach those situations. And I would like to see in the interview as well, how is the job fit? How is the culture in our organization, and how are you going to fit with this organization or within your team? What kind of personalities do I have, and how do you fit in that team? And the hiring manager or other peers that may be part of the interview process will make sure that you have the technical knowledge as well as the team fit. So they are going to be the ones looking deeply into your portfolio, making a lot of questions of your thought process to design something, and to make sure that you have the technical abilities to make the job. Then sometimes, depending on the organization, and this is something that we use, we have personality assessments and job-related simulations. Sometimes is to see how do you really are consistent with what you told me in the interview of how you approach communication, problems, processes, conflicts, and what this assessment really tells me about yourself. And simulations will, show me your job in, a more controlled environment. But this really depends on the organization, and it is very, very helpful for us in the decision-making process. Sometimes can be critical. If someone doesn't pass the personality assessment because there are some traits that can be harmful to the team, we definitely will not hire that person. Then comes the background check, and if you are in the background check step, you are in the good track, you are doing fine in the process. This is a very good indicator. This is something that goes really quickly, and then comes what we are all expecting, the job offer. And we will talk in a few minutes about the offer in more, targeted. Now I would like to tell you what are my top 5 traits or skills that I'm looking in a candidate. Number
Elisa,
one, yes.
Before we go there, I have a question for you. And
Yes.
sorry, this is totally unscripted, but it came up earlier about references. Do you have a recommendation of what would be an ideal type of reference that you should have on your profile? Like somebody mentioned faculty teachers, and for example, I still have a graduate professor as part of my references. But do you have a preference on that?
Yes. Thinking about our audience that are mostly students, I will go for a professor that can give a good reference of your job or your process as a student. If you have done any internship or if you are working right now in the design industry, definitely someone in that category. Recently, I changed job, and someone that I put in my references was a client, a customer, internal customer, so an employee in a high level position that I want this person to give feedback of how I deliver my job during that time working with him. So don't be afraid to ask someone that you work with to really give feedback of your work. But you have to call them and, hey, Alberto, I am changing jobs or I am in an interview process and they are asking me for references. May I put you as one of my references? Do you prefer that I give your email or your cell phone? And I have never had someone telling me no, but please do ask first.
Thank you for that. There we go.
Yes. So what are my top 5? Beyond the requirements, knowledge, and abilities, that's something that your resume will tell me, What I'm looking for in a candidate is a growth mindset. Do you know, have anyone heard of growth mindset before? And you can use the chat to let me know if this is something new or if you had growth mindset or people with a growth mindset are persons that permanently, they're always improving and striving to be better and better and better. They know they have some abilities and knowledge, but they know that they can really upscale those abilities as well. They see failure as an opportunity to become better persons. So that for me is a deal breaker in an interview. If I see someone that is always whining or complaining, that is fixed mindset, I don't want that. I want someone with a good attitude. Second, flexibility. Current workplaces ask for flexibility and agility constantly. We need to accomplish some goals, and sometimes that requires changes on directions, changes on budget, changes on customers, changes all over the place. And as it depends on us to really hire persons that can move to that pace that the organization needs. The third, problem solving skills. And for me, this is somehow connected to the growth mindset. And how do you approach barriers or problems instead of complaining? I wish someone that can really bring me solutions to the table. And sometimes for that, you need to have great communication skills. And when I say communication skills, I'm talking about the voice, the tone, the projection, the content of the communication, of course, the logical order in which you answer me the questions of the interview, because everything communicates in the interview process. Even when I get here to my job and I pass through the lobby and I say good morning, and I know that those are candidates, sometimes they don't answer me. And sometimes there are some that say good morning, hi, and they look at my face and I say, okay, this is someone that is really, aware of what is happening, alert, instead of, in their own bubble, in their own world. And 5, collaboration, which is something that I think has been being repeatedly in the session. But nobody works alone. Nobody can really make big accomplishments alone. And I look for examples. And it has to be concrete examples. And then, well, I think that I know that. No. Tell me about a situation and what did you do and what was the result. And that are for me my top 5 during the interview process. Can we move forward to the red flags? Because sometimes we talk about the do's and what I expect, but this is something that has to be talked directly as well. And what are the red flags for me as HR? Fixed mindset. I really want people that find workarounds about difficulties and not someone that, see mistakes at the end of the road. Number 2, the ego. And you know that ego can be a toxic for any organization or team. And it's my responsibility as HR to make sure that all the team members are considered and listen to themselves, are aligned towards one common goal, and we can move forward as the organization needs. Insecurities, everything communicates. The handshake, the eye contact during the interview, selecting your words. Well, it is probable that maybe we could, may, should. No. Language creates reality. Communicate in a way that you project yourself as self-confidence and with the expertise needed to make the job. Early on, Gabriela or Gabby was saying that she was asked a question, maybe with other intentions, but sometimes they do make us questions of things that I don't know, have never been in that situation. Well, you have to stop and you drink some water so you can think, okay, what is the recruiter really asking me? Oh, I think that she wants to know how I communicate in difficult situations. And you will say, I haven't been in that exact situation before, but I remember that when working in this project, I was facing some communication issues and I did A, B, C. So sometimes we face questions that we don't know the answers. So try to look deeper. What do they really want to know? And bring another example to the table. 4th, complacency. This can be very dangerous because it really impacts our desire to strive, to always be better and improve. And as a professional or as a person, even in our processes, this always projects in the workplace. So somehow this one is connected to the next one, is the lack of clear vision of ambition. Being a follower always is not really what I'm looking in my candidates. I want someone that will initiate and bring new ideas. I will always ask, how do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years? And this is telling me that you are clear as water, that I want to be in a position that I can do A, B, C. And in 10 years, I want to be, having my own design boutique or design company. Or maybe the question is, what is your big next milestone? And I don't want really big things. I just want to see some ambition in that person. Because as soon as I have employees in the comfort zone, we are in a danger zone as a company. And we stop innovating and creating new stuff, for our customers. So
before I wanted to talk to us about now the advantage of being a designer, and that is that we have a portfolio that we can show. And I want to say this because other disciplines, the interview is totally abstract. You're talking to the person and that's it. But us as designers, we have something to show. And if you're in the audience and you're shy, you're timid, you're an introvert, and you're thinking, there's never a way that I'm going to be able to showcase myself as secure just because of my personality. Please understand that this is why I'm connecting back to how to think about the portfolio. as a spark for conversation. If initiating conversation is hard for you, know that the portfolio can be that way, then maybe all you have to do is design it with one keyword per project, so that when you see the page and you're all nervous in your own head and you're working through it, you see that word and at least you get an instant way of how to have this conversation. And that advantage is not provided in other disciplines. So think about the portfolio as a strategic device that will allow you to charm somebody like Elisa professionally to the point that she's like, I totally want to continue working with this person.
Definitely. And use it to explain to me the situations. If I make you questions about a difficult team, well, show me the design and show me the story behind the design. Some do's and don'ts for the interview. Do's: look into the company and learn about what it does and what drives it. Go to that website, look in the About Us, look the newsroom, and really gather information about the company. I always ask candidates, how do you know about us and what do you know about us? That is something that I really always want to listen from my candidates. Show up appropriately dressed. Depending on the organization, look about the dress code, be sharp. And be sharp doesn't mean be 1 hour earlier. That doesn't speak good. Be sharp, 10 minutes-ish before the interview. Deliver high impact responses. And I want to stop here for a moment. I always use the STAR method to train my managers on what to expect in the responses of the candidates. When I ask you about a situation, or any question, I will expect that you complete these 4 stages. Talk me about the situation. Give me context. What was happening? What was the situation in detail? What was the task? What were you supposed to do? What was your action? What you did, and what was the result? So a candidate that gives me the whole story: situation, task, action, a result, in a good way, with a good example, we go 5 points in the in the rating of the interview. A candidate that will only give me the result, no, I want the story. And what did you do? And what was you supposed to do? So this is very important. Listen to the questions so you can really accomplish the 4 stages. Don't be so tense, and relax, and use the sense of humor. The sense of humor is a good way to connect with others, always in a balanced way, but chill out a little bit, relax, and enjoy the process. Make questions. For me, it's important because this is a bi-directional process. I want to meet you, but I'm sure that you want to meet the organization and how is that we work here, what is the culture, what is important for us. Some questions that you can make is, how do you envision this role within the next few months? Or what are the key projects in this role? Or how can I contribute to the company goals during the next years? What are the most pressing issues you are having in the organization, and how can I contribute to those? Those are smart questions that talk to me very good about what is important for you in your role. And the don't leave questions without answers. Don't ask about compensation early on in the process. I know you were talking about this before. Don't ramble, because you will lose me, and I will activate my ADHD, and I will be thinking about other things that I have to do. So be concise in your answers, and never ever talk poorly about previous employers. That is, you will not look good at all. Anything to add, Alberto?
Oh, I think we're good here.
Okay. And now, with the offer, always, always, listen to me, always comes the perfect moment to negotiate. It is now or never. And you may negotiate money, compensation. You may negotiate the role, the location, the benefits, vacations. You can negotiate anything, but this is the moment. Don't be afraid. Usually, I am always expecting some kind of negotiation with every offer. So this is not something unexpected at all for us as HR. Even negotiate a hiring bonus. This is the moment. Do it. Don't be afraid, because once you are in, you have to wait until, the normal processes in the organization.
I think it's important for those of you early on. This is going to be an intimidating part. And if you're not going into a company and you're going into freelancing, negotiating will now be part of your life forever. And you have to understand that the people at the other side of the table, be it a client, an HR rep, or a fellow colleague, they're all used to this. And it's in our head that we have to somehow break free of those restraints so that we can say, oh no, this is this much, or no, I'm asking for this. And then the one feedback that I would like to give is that you have to learn a little bit as to how companies work. So for example, it's not the same to ask a company for $5,000 more than to ask them for a better healthcare plan. Mm-hmm. Because the way that they deduce that in the taxes is totally different. And of course, every state is different, so I can't, either I or Elisa can't really give you direct, concrete examples based on your state. But know that having a higher salary is not always the best smart way to negotiate a better deal for yourself. Mm-hmm. And that's something to consider as you move forward. Mm-hmm. Now, we have 8 minutes left. We do have one more slide that we wanted to do, but I want to see if there's questions. I want to be respectful if anybody wants to ask us a question in the Q&A or the chat. The awkward silence of working. I'll give it 10 more seconds, and if not, okay. Okay, so Elisa, we're getting asked, what is the most memorable interview?
For me, the most, for me, it's the one that I really connect with the candidate in a personal level, that I can see this person immediately working with us, because there is this kind of perfect fit with the organization, and the two that comes to mind have used a sense of humor during the interview. And I think that for me, that's important, but because I think they are showing me their true self, and they show as confident as this was, a lunch with a friend, not in a disrespectful way or unprofessional, but I get to see the person, not really the candidate, and this fixed way.
In my case, Michaela, the best interview is that interview where I learned something. And I don't necessarily tie it to design. Did I learn something about you as a human? Did I learn something about the context of where we're operating? Did I learn something culturally because you come from a different background that I do? I think that is thrived into who I am and how I like to meet people and connect with people. And I think that couldn't be a better question, because in the end, I want to go back to the beginning of the day when Mitch Goldstein said, you gotta be you. Yeah. And I couldn't agree more. Every interviewer, even Elisa, she has managers. So even if you get to interviews with some of her managers, the experience might not be the same as with her or with me or with, let's say, Mina, who is a fellow colleague, but she has other artistic sensibilities. So in the end, it's all about you being you and being sure that you're proud of what you're putting out there, because eventually a match will be made. And the best matches are the ones where you're happy and I, as an employer, picked somebody that I am happy to pick, and that it turned out to be that person as the process started. Because the most awful thing is to have a great, lovely interview, and then 3 weeks in, you're like, where is the person that I interviewed? I don't see it in the day to day, and those are the harder moments.
Totally agree.
Okay.
Well,
so just a small closer. Elisa said, oh wait, we have a Q&A. So quickly.
yes.
So has there ever been a moment that a candidate created an opportunity to work with a company if she had an innovative idea to help the company perform better?
That created an opportunity. For me, maybe not created an opportunity during the interview process, but show me that he or she can fix immediately a pain point that we're having. And it was like, oh my God, this is the person. She's speaking our language. She knows what we need. This is it. We stop looking. This is it. That's my closest situation. Have you had any situation like that, Alberto?
No, I haven't hired, my studio is 5 people, so it's not, I haven't had that opportunity yet. I will say to an earlier conversation today, somebody asked, was it okay to email random people? I have gotten emails over the years of people who don't know me. I wasn't looking for a job. They reached out, they showed their work. I saw that they were great at their work. They felt passionate, and I hired them, and they were with me for years. So definitely creating an opportunity maybe can be interpreted in many ways. So yes, for sure, try to get it over and done. Okay, so as a closer, Elisa said to me, Alberto, we can't leave it at the interview because the process, once you're in the job, the process isn't over. We want to close here today. Elisa wants to share a few final pieces of advice, because the fact that you signed that contract doesn't mean that you're said and done. You now have to prove yourself and actually make people want you even more.
Yes, and there are some things that are really important in the first 2 weeks. Get to know the people and the business, have one-on-ones, ask about the objectives or priorities for the department, for your role. Focus on really knowing the business and how can you contribute to that. But remain humble. That is something very interesting when anyone starts a new job, that you have a lot of energy, enthusiasm, fresh eyes, and you can identify everything that is wrong. And you can implement everything to save the situation. And you have to be very humble, and really understand what is the context, what has happened before I get here. And then, contribute and give your feedback and implement, but you have you need a balance. Third, show your added value, define low-hanging fruits, immediate contributions, and show that you can add value to the organization. And this doesn't have to be big things, just, little details that will give the rest of the team a message that, this person is bringing it on and it's good. And final, have a voice. When asked about an opinion, give it. When you are in a meeting, a brainstorming, make questions, make your voice heard, because this is very important to keep moving forward in the organization and make connections with other coworkers. So that's it.
Well, Elisa, I want to thank you. I can sort of do it on behalf of the DEC, but thank you for coming for a design event and sharing your insights. For those of you in the audience, I think that as a designer and all of us that have presented today, I think the common thread has been find your voice. But make sure, don't be shy to put that voice out there. And as a studio owner, I'll tell you, the big difference, whether I hire somebody or not, is whether their work seems generic, and it might be the most creative work ever, but if in terms of personality and engagement, it seems generic because I don't see or feel passion, that goes a long way onto somebody that their work might be, in your eyes, I do better work. Yeah, but can you actually show that passion without being arrogant and without being pushy? And I think that that's what we connect best. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks again to all of our panelists and presenters, and to Lishan as well. And if you go to the very last link in our chat, you can see his Design Future Now podcast, FYI.
Well, and I also just want to say, I know this is probably long for everyone, but thank you to everyone on the DEC. I think this is my last event as co-chair. So it's been a true pleasure of my life to be serving alongside Mina, but I know we will be in good hands with Alberto. But getting to meet such wonderful people like David here as well has been phenomenal. And it's great to just be here today with so many people that I look up to, like Diane and other David and all of the people we've had here today. So thank you all for being a part of this wonderful event.